Wow, this video took a long time to make. Hi, I'm Ray. If you're not familiar with who I am a mega Hilda fan. No, not that mega Hilda, although that game is pretty good too. And for a while, I've been wanting to follow into the footsteps of other YouTubers by just basically ranking every episode from the TV show. So of course, with me being a huge Hilda connoisseur, I had to get my foot into the ring, and well, now you're seeing it. Firstly, I want to shout out Nathaniel Bandy for a moment because while I have had this idea for a long time now, I recently had the chance to watch the entirety of his watching every SpongeBob episode video, and it has basically inspired me to come back on this idea and rank the episodes in pretty much the exact same way he did. Because there's a bunch of episodes, what I'm going to do is go season by season and rank every episode from worst to best. Like for example, we'll start off with season 1's worst episode first, and then move on to season 1's best episode, and then we'll go to season 2's worst episodes, and then season 2's best episodes, and so on. Do I make myself clear? Good! Let's get started. Number 13, The Ghost. If you know me, you're probably already well aware that I consider The Ghost to be by far the worst episode in the entire show, and the only episode I would actually consider to be bad. It starts off pretty strong during its first 4 minutes, where Hilda and David suspect that a ghost might be involved in the mess that was created in Frida's room. And you could tell that maybe since we're dealing with the paranormal now, that this could be somewhat interesting to watch. But then, it all goes downhill. It turns out that it wasn't the ghost making the mess, it was actually her doing. Why? Because she just assumed that the room just magically cleaned itself, and that's a totally normal thing to happen. Okay, first of all, this idea on its own that Frida just assumes that all rooms clean themselves is just it's so bizarre. Has Frida literally never seen her parents clean her room for her or showed her how to clean at all? Or even clean during school or during the Sparrow Scouts? You think for someone who's organized enough to have their own action plan binder and knows to always read footnotes that she would be smart enough to know that rooms just don't clean themselves in that way? This would have been a perfectly fine excuse if these characters were like 5 years old, but remember, at this time in the show, these three are like 11 and 12 years old. Surely Frida must have come across and learned some responsibilities like that, right? But okay, let's just assume that yes, Frida genuinely did not know that rooms didn't clean themselves despite the circumstances. As strange as that sounds, that then somehow causes her to stop being confident and organized altogether? Look, I get going through a midlife crisis, but having all of this happen to you because of a missing book feels pretty extreme, doesn't it? Oh, and instead of supporting her, David instead starts belittling her? That's one of the biggest issues I have with this episode. Everyone here acts like an asshole for no reason. Whether it's David making fun of Frida or Alfred being way more technical than he needs to be. Even Frida isn't safe from this, but we'll get to that later. It's just a series of weird writing decisions that they decided to make just for the purposes of creating some kind of poorly executed beef between these three. And poor Frida too. This episode was just torturing her throughout the whole thing, and it was not fun to watch. What are we as the audience supposed to do? Point at it and go, haha, you don't know how to clean your room. Everyone point and laugh at the little girl. Especially with David, like, God, I wish I could just punch him through the TV screen. David and Frida are supposed to be like best friends, and yet he's constantly making himself look like a dick to her. Like, what the f? Anyway, what else was I saying? Oh yeah. Because of Frida's unusual lack of confidence in herself, Hilda decides to help her by taking the Mara approach and find the ghost to help get her book back, since that's what must resolve things in the end. After getting help by Kaisa, who somehow already knows Craigie Williams' grave by heart. Okay, pause. This isn't exactly a complaint of the episode, but I'm just now realizing that show never went on to clarify whether or not she knows every grave by heart or if she just happened to be a big fan of Craigie Williams for some reason. It probably wasn't brought up again because no one else besides me even cares, but that's still such a strange thing to throw in and never mention again. So anyway, they get help from Kaisa and make their way to the cemetery and revive some ghosts, which is admittedly kind of cool at first, getting to see ghosts in the show for the first time. And they succeed in reviving Craigie Williams. There's just one problem though. He doesn't actually have the book and suspects someone else of having it, thus leading to a ghost wrestling match, and wow, is this scene just painful to go through. It's not at all nearly as fun as the baby troll chase scene from episode 5, and if anything, I was just cringing the entire time this played out, and it didn't even matter because for one, they still cheated, and two, they didn't even have the right book to begin with. Like, what? Why? What was even the point of any of this? But okay, whoop-de-doo, we all gotta fail sometimes, right? That's just life. Fast forward to election day, Frida isn't there, and so David and Hilda decide to check up on her to see if she is okay. Now, this final scene right here, this ending is the reason why I nearly stopped watching Hilda entirely when I was first watching the show. It actually upset me that much. Hilda and David, like I've mentioned, pay a visit to Frida to check up on her. She's clearly not feeling well and explains to them that she feels like she might have let down her parents by not being the perfect self she felt like she was supposed to be. Hilda tries to comfort her as best as they could, although not admittedly the best cause they're kids, and then... Frida starts getting mad at her? First, she mentions her frustration with David for making fun of her, which, okay, is valid. But then, she goes on to complain about how Hilda is always taking her on dangerous adventures. Even though 3 episodes ago, she literally says that she was 100% okay with it because they, quote, like that about her, end quote. After Hilda herself made it perfectly clear to them that she wouldn't force them to do it if they didn't want to. And yet Frida here is now claiming that she's dragging them to do it. Again, what the f***? Did the producers already forget about their own episodes? Or are they just throwing it in here because they didn't even think anyone would notice? Well, I noticed, and it's pissing me off! There was absolutely no reason for the show to contradict itself in this way, and I'm pretty sure they only did it because the writers couldn't come up with a better excuse for an argument than just David annoying. Also, why is Frida of all people talking trash to Hilda? She literally went out of her way to try and help Frida despite how insane the idea of bringing a ghost back to living already sounds. Yes, they may not have succeeded in the end, but there is absolutely no reason for her to blame her friends this way. Whatever sympathy I have for Frida in this episode basically vanished as soon as she essentially wished for Hilda to have never moved to Trollberg at all. Even though, again, Hilda has done nothing but help her this entire time! And to end it all off, as a final middle finger to anyone who has had to endure this garbage of an episode, it implies that the Nissa were behind it all along, and the episode finally ends. Wow. You know what? At first, I didn't think this episode was all that bad, but after giving it a rewatch and just seeing how badly they butchered the writing for these characters, on top of the story just not being that good, and having one of the most frustrating endings I have ever seen in any piece of media, I am just glad that there has since never been another episode of Hilda to stoop this low ever again. And if there comes a day where we miraculously get a season 4 or even higher, I really hope it stays that way. 3 out of 10. Number 12. The Sparrow Scouts. It's fine. The beginning parts of this episode where Hilda becomes a Sparrow Scout and officially becomes friends with David and Frida as a result are obviously the highlights here. But after that, it just becomes a pretty forgettable episode about trying to rescue a baby Vitra that they accidentally sent off to be mulched. Honestly, I'm not the biggest fan of the Vitra in this episode, especially since they come off as annoying above all else. But other than that, there isn't really a whole lot to say here since it just feels like a really uneventful Hilda episode. We do get to see more of Frida's responsible side, and David calling Vitra stinky weeds is kind of funny, as well as Hilda accidentally entering a room to another Vitra drawing a cow in Hawaiian clothing. Other than the small things, it just feels like a typical Hilda adventure, and I would say that it's still a good time, just not really worth watching after the first 5 minutes. 6 out of 10. Number 11. The Lost Clan. For an episode about contracts, you would have expected this to just be tedious and boring, right? Well, actually no. This was surprisingly fun to sit through. The main premise is that Hilda and friends go out to gather some plants one day when suddenly they discover a bunch of mysterious looking elves who kidnaps David. It turns out that these elves are known as the Lost Clan and have actually been beefing with the Aldrich family because even after their contract war seemingly ended in mutual agreement, Braga and the sellers made the huge mistake of only signing twice.
You're supposed to gasp now.
They refuse to sign any more contracts and are forced to find a loophole to see if they can make everyone happy. After convincing the Lindworm to help them by giving them some plants, Alfred comes back to let Bartel know that him and his clan are officially exile-free! Yay!
Now what?
Yeah, this scene right here is basically Hilda's equivalent of, I don't know. I never thought I'd get this far. Because they literally just told Alfred that the Aldrich family could just keep it for themselves if they really wanted to, since they were just so used to already being where they were at. Which is so weird and funny to me because the entire reason for this beef in the first place was because they tried to buy it and now they're just cool with it. Bro's literally hating just to hate. But all in all, everyone is happy and the Braga family are now allies. I think the only major problem I had with this episode is that aside from some moments, especially with David here and there, it wasn't super funny, and it kind of just feels like one of those episodes where they just come and go. But on the positive side, this episode also includes some of the most gorgeous shots throughout the entire season, which includes this library scene and the Lindworm's garden. For as stubborn as the Braga family could be, I enjoyed their over-the-top mean attitude too. Those guys could kill, well, maybe not humans, but they could kill. It's such a serious feeling yet unserious episode because of how silly the elf lore was, and I'm all here for it. 7 out of 10. Number 10. The Hidden People. Ah yes, the very first episode to start it all. The opening act of this episode, which by the way I'm just now realizing takes up 6 minutes of this whole thing, is genuinely amazing because it's basically an animated remake of the first Hilda folk book. If you haven't watched the show, well, first of all, why are you watching this video to begin with? But second, if you have, then you will know how truly magical it is to watch the intro for the first time. It's colorful, fun, and exciting, and the opening sequence only drives up that exciting factor even more. The rest of the episode, however, is just fine. This is the episode where we're introduced to the Woodman and Alfred and his fellow elves. And I'd say their introductions were pretty good. What kind of put me off about the rest of this is that it's just basically an elf drama that doesn't really get resolved until the next episode. And plus it's following that pattern seen in the rest of season 1 that elves are portrayed as a bit mean-spirited. How is it any fair that Hilda had no idea she was in the middle of an elf village? Other than that though, it's a pretty decent start to this amazing show, even if it did feel like an obvious one-parter. I see why some YouTubers like Mark stopped watching after this episode cause it makes it seem like this was going to be the plot for the rest of the series. But I'm so glad that was not the case. 7 out of 10. Number 9. The Nightmare Spirit. I'm a little conflicted on this episode because on the one hand, this episode doesn't really go anywhere in the first half, but on the other hand, the second half is really good. Hilda and friends go out to have an adventure one day when they decide to stalk some seemingly random teenage girl. After disappearing mysteriously, David talks about how he's been having nightmares about rats and thinks Hilda is the cause of it. So what is Hilda's solution? To go to the Rat King, of course! Upon learning that the teenage girl is the cause of David's nightmares, Hilda and Frida decide to go after them to investigate who they would later find out to be the Mara, a bunch of people who like scaring the heebie-jeebies out of kids for their amusement. Hilda challenges one of the Mara to scare her so she could leave David alone, and the following chaos ensues. This whole scene with David's Mara trying to scare Hilda and her nightmare is just so good. It's scary, action-packed, and just really fun to watch. Joanna finding David in Hilda's room is one of the top 5 funniest scenes in the entire show. It's just one of the more creepier episodes, and I kinda love how the show isn't afraid to hold back on fear despite the show being mostly for kids. With that being said though, the episode wasn't all that funny, and the first 14 minutes just felt like build up to this one notable moment. It was still interesting to see how the events played out though, and yeah, that nightmare scene is just too good. 7.5 out of 10. Number 8. The Nissa. The title of this episode is a bit misleading because yes, this is the episode where we are introduced to Tontu and the Nissa, but this is really more of a part 1 of a 2-parter episode like the Hidden People and the Midnight Giant. It's the end of the year for the Sparrow Scouts, and so to celebrate, Raven Leader announces they're gonna have an end of the year camping trip where they have the opportunity to get the coveted camping badge. Meanwhile, Frida strangely hasn't attended Sparrow Scouts in quite a while, so they decided to check up on her to see what's up. Turns out Frida already had other plans stand to hang out with these two for the day, and that's where we're introduced to Kelly. I can't lie with you, she actually managed to jump scare me twice in this episode. So Hilda and David are forced to piss off. Gotta say, Frida is not making herself look any better by ditching her friends like this. So with that plan failing, Hilda decides to prepare for the camping trip with her mom, and that's where they first learn about the supposed Black Hound. Hilda comes across this interesting furball creature and tries to take a look at it before Mom gets her away from it. Before going on this lecture about how Nissa that are banished are not to be approached or gain sympathy for. Poor Tontu. Dude just looks sad here. So they continue to prepare, and at this point in time, that's when Joanna seriously starts to consider that the Black Hound might actually be a real thing, but just plays it off as some sort of myth. Strangely, the snacks that Hilda had were gone, and they just assumed that Twig ate them. Meanwhile, this clip of Frida and Kelly exactly describes how I feel about modern and classic SpongeBob respectively.
This show is awful. I know, right? It's great.
Kelly, being the great friend that she is, doesn't allow her to see Hilda, and so she tries to find out who the heck this Nissa is. Tontu explains to Hilda that the Nissa are people who live inside tiny unused spaces that can be inside someone's house. People who live in the houses have the ability to banish Nissa if they do something wrong. But Tontu claims that he did nothing wrong. So Hilda decides to invite him over to her place and check out the nowhere space. Turns out there was already a wild Nissa living in this house and chaos ensues. Damn, is Tontu strong as hell. He took a whole picture frame and smashed it to bro's head like that. And it is a mess, and oh boy is Joanna pissed. I mean, understandably so too. If I came home and saw that my house looked like this, let's just say that Tontu would have never been seen alive ever again. And yeah, this is the part where I say the episode starts to become a bit misleading, since the rest of the episode is now focused on the Black Hound. And also the camping trip. It's obvious now that this might not just be some urban legend. It could very well be out there somewhere in these woods. All is that basically pushed aside for now, however, as they continue on with their plans. That is, until Hilda spots something strange across the distance. And it's definitely something hairy, alright. Just not very. The thing about Hilda that I've seemed to appreciate more and more is that she's never the type of person to hold any grudges towards someone. Like, obviously we know that Tontu didn't do anything wrong, but other people might not think so. People like Joanna who try and discourage Hilda from giving that sort of sympathy to him. It's a small but great little lesson to kids that you should never be afraid to draw up your own conclusions sometimes. But eventually they have to come back to the campsite to make sure that Raven Leader is satisfied. Ah, but sneaky Hilda isn't done yet. She and David try to head back to Tontu, but not without stumbling upon Frida hanging out with the Mara. David, being the classic chicken that he is, gets scared of a frog and ends up exposing himself and Hilda in front of Frida and the Mara. This is easily the Mara at the most creepiest, like, ugh. Them floating around with their eyes like that is just creepy. But guess who shows up? That's right, the Black Hound. And the episode ends. There's not much else to say here besides that I just think that this was yet another great episode. Getting to see Tontu and the Nissa in action was great. The side plot with Frida and Namara was actually pretty interesting. And also Raven Leader saying Willy like a dozen times.
Willy, Willy, Willy!
8 out of 10. Number 7, the Tide Mice. The premise of this episode is relatively simple. Hilda decides that it's a good idea to cast a spell on David and Joanna that brings them good luck so that David could have a part in the Warblers and Joanna could finally have a job as a graphic designer again. There's only one issue though. Hilda forgot to read the footnote and is now at risk of taking possession of their souls.
Never ever ignore a footnote.
You can say that again, Alfred. All things considered, this is a great episode. I just felt so bad for David because he's just a magnet for all things to go wrong and have bugs constantly bother him. While I do feel bad, I will also admit that it was also pretty funny. This is also the episode where Luke makes his first and only voice cameo in the show. He does make appearances every now and then, but this is the only episode in the series in which you can actually hear him speak. This is also the first time in the show where magic and witches actually starts to become prominent, and it's just really fascinating to watch. Also, isn't it weird that Kaisa just basically lets this naive 11-year-old girl do whatever she wants in this place? Or let anyone in, really? Like, for a post that holds such dangerous power, you would want people to not have any of it, right? Well, it doesn't matter because Hilda decides to cast it anyway, and while it does work for a while, weird stuff starts happening and they try to put a stop to it. Even though they use a different voice actor for David singing, I still really like hearing it. He can hit those notes, like put this man on American Idol or something. So the moral of the story is, don't do magic if you're not a witch. And also, read the footnotes. 8 out of 10. Number 6, the Troll Rock. This is surprisingly one of the funnier and more enjoyable episodes from season 1 looking back on it. Remember that rock that David kept to use for his rock collection? Well, it turns out it's a baby troll that he just kidnapped and therefore sets up his mother troll to go find it. The highlight for this episode, as implied, is the humor. From Joanna pretending to talk to herself, to Hilda talking about apple monsters, to David breakdancing. There's definitely quite a bunch of moments in here that will give you a chuckle or two. This is also the episode where I've seen the most exaggerated faces being made, like it almost gives me SpongeBob vibes. The story writing itself is great here too, because while comedy is definitely this episode's biggest highlight, it's also just very fun to tag along Hilda and friends to contain this baby. Plus in the end, where Holgrim finally gets to understand Hilda's motivations, is just too sweet. This is such a fun episode and I highly recommend giving it a watch if you haven't already. 8 out of 10. Number 5. The Black Hound. This episode picks up directly from the Nissa. Kelly, once again being the greatest friend ever, decides to literally push Frida towards the beast and just disappear. Wow, as if the Mara weren't already assholes enough as is. Hilda, David, and Frida eventually manage to escape it and rush back to campsite to alert the Raven leader. Insert classic not the time to panic line, only for everyone to panic afterwards. And Hilda does try to find Tontu again before being stopped and forced to pack up. This entire season, by the way, Hilda has managed to get a hold of approximately 0 Sparrow Scout badges. And her last chance of obtaining one is by participating in this fundraising activity while simultaneously trying to find Tontu. You know, even though she was literally shoved into a giant animal by her own friend, Frida is acting surprisingly chill around Kelly. And we see that maybe Mara, like Kelly, aren't always quite as evil as they might seem to be. But forget that, we've got to find Tontu, and she does. Well, sort of. It turns out that literally every Nissa known to man just automatically has the name Tontu, which is definitely a strange yet interesting choice. Also, this Nissa specifically sounds so much like Leon from the Resident Evil games, and it's just really cracking me up.
The place of which you speak is vast and cold. Who knows where one would emerge?
I really don't give a damn. Rain or shine, you're going down.
Hilda does not succeed in finding her Tontu and rushes back to the Sparrow Scout Center only to learn that she was just too late to earn her badge. So with that, fears are still running around about the Black Hound, and for the next day, Joanna eagerly can't wait to see Hilda get her badges at the ceremony. Before Hilda sleeps though, she learns by Alfred that this creature could be a bar guest, which is actually pretty accurate since in real life they're described to be as big scary black dogs. I mean, it really shouldn't be a surprise considering this is Hilda we're talking about. So pretty much Hilda has no idea whether or not she can even trust Anissa anymore, and so she has no choice but to just head back to the Scout Center and face the reality that she must face with her mother. Until BAM! The Hound comes straight from the ceiling along with Tontu. And honestly, thank God it decided to show Hilda giving Frida's book back by the end of it all, or else I would have never forgiven this show's biggest sins. It turns out though that the Nissa that was staying at Hilda's home specifically has already known this bar guest for the longest time, and the poor thing was just alone and hungry. So we finally know what exactly was creating all these messes that were blamed onto the Nissa, right? Mystery solved and the day is saved. Well, not quite. Safety Patrol do not like this guy and will do everything to contain it, thus forcing Joanna and the game to get this thing back to where it came from. But in the middle of that, the dog just does not want any of it and ends up blocking the view of Joanna's front window. But right before they could crash, the Nissa teleport themselves into this weird void thing where Hilda, Mum, and Tontu make it out. But not Jellybean or the other Nissa. It doesn't really matter though, since for all intents and purposes, the day is saved. And we get this really sweet ending where everyone reunites with each other. And this ending quote that Woodman says is just so good that I still have it put on as a poster to this very day. I am a little disappointed with how this episode turned out to be, considering that this is supposed to be the finale of like the first season, but I'm not complaining about it too much. It just felt like your standard run-of-the-mill Hilda adventuring episode with a heartwarming ending to it. And if the show did end here completely, I would still be pretty happy with it. Of course, if I knew what was to come of the show after this and it still didn't continue, then I would obviously be pretty upset. But as it stands, it's a great episode that finally settles the conflict that Frida had with David and Hilda, once and for all. 8.5 out of 10. Number 4. The Storm. After the train wreck that was the ghost episode, I'm so glad the show ended up redeeming itself by giving us one of season 1's best right after. A massive storm goes on in Trollberg, and after hearing that Victoria Van Gale might be in some trouble, she teams up with the Raven and David to see what's up at the weather station. To their surprise, she seems completely fine. At first anyway. Right off the bat, I just love how you can already tell that something is up with Victoria by her sudden and fast movements along with the questions she asks, although to be fair, if a bunch of people came and snuck on me through my garage, I probably would have some questions to ask too. And it's not just this that gives us a hint behind her motivations, but the episode itself straight up says this to us. Usually I am not a fan of when kids movies or shows basically spoon feed obvious clues as to what's about to happen or why the bad guy should be seen as the bad guy. But I think it works for this episode because this whole season's shtick is to not judge a book by its cover, whether it's encountering trolls or teenage monsters. So in a way you can make the argument that maybe Victoria will turn up to not be as mad as she appears to be. We'll have the tables turned. And turns out that she not only has the power to predict the weather, she can also control it. How, you may ask? By luring a weather spirit in, of course. In hindsight, Hilda or Raven should have asked earlier on whether that involves kidnapping one, but I'm not too bothered by it. After Victoria's contraptions fail, Hilda sets out to deal with the weather spirits herself, which might actually be the bravest thing she's done so far. Clouds are usually not that close to us, so along with the snow, it must have been cold as heck up there. David decides he wants to find out what's really going on with Victoria, and so he does. Meanwhile, Hilda continues to try and settle things down with the weather spirits, and it works. At least for a little bit. Hilda ends up discovering something that we've pretty much all known about. A weather spirit trapped inside. And not just any weather spirit, a baby. So yeah, this obviously pisses off one of the weather spirits and Hilda is forced to release it. But not without the biggest explosion since the Trinity test. And that's it. That's the episode. Hilda is dead. But nope, actually, see? Haha, got you. Hilda's still alive, defying some type of Newton's law by standing on a cloud until she isn't. And she's dead. Just kidding. Again. This episode is both really fascinating and really cool. I say fascinating because this is the first time in the show where we actually get to see like a legitimate antagonist to the story and not just some misinformed people or creatures come into play. Victoria is mad. And while she may not be very evil if I were to say, I mean, she still kind of is for choosing to experiment on some poor baby weather spirit, but to just see how the events played out in this episode too. And I say cool because of the scenes with the Raven flying through the storm and Victoria trying to convince Hilda to stop. These are all fantastic scenes to watch through, especially when it comes to really showing Van Gale's true colors. And for as crazy as Victoria is, she's a great character, and I think the reason for that is how careful the writers were in giving her this crazy yet intelligent attitude for episodes like these. Oh, and also can't forget about the Raven being here too. 9 out of 10. Number 3. The Midnight Giant. Now this episode is the reason why Hilda continues to be as beloved as it is today. There's a lot going on in this one episode, but oddly enough I still found most of it to be really great. First we get a glimpse into Hilda's conversation with Jorgen, then her and her mother visit Trollberg seemingly for the first time. And this is also where we're introduced to David and Frida. I think for such little screen time they had here, there couldn't have been a better introduction scene. David is the playful and quirky one, while Frida is the more organized and educated of the two. It's so short, yet you know exactly the type of personalities they have from the get-go. Hilda and her mom return back home where, thanks to the woodman's habit of breaking into people's houses, Hilda learns that the giants have been a disappearing species because of the growing number of human civilization. And the next morning, Hilda goes on this grand adventure to talk to the Elf King to convince him to let her stay. When she unknowingly awakens a snowy mountain giant that turns out to be the one that Jorgen was looking for, and yippee, the day is saved and everyone is happy. Well, except for that one thing. Yeah, as unfortunate as this was, it finally got to convince them that maybe Trollberg isn't such a bad idea after all. And off they went, and a new journey in their life is about to begin. This episode is just so damn amazing. From the heartbreaking story of Jorgen potentially being the only one to roam around Earth, to him being reunited with his lover, to Woodman being his direct self and that iconic Frankie Cosmos song, And of course the introduction to David and Frida once again. There is a lot to like about this episode, and a very satisfying conclusion to this series introduction. If not for this episode, I would imagine more people would be a bit more hesitant to continue with the rest of the show. 9 out of 10. Number 2, The House in the Woods. Simply put, what a cozy and fantastic episode this was. It has pretty much everything you can ask for in a Hilda episode at this point in time. The humor is great, the story is fun to watch, and to top it all off, it's heartwarming too. This episode picks up directly from episode 10, where Hilda now has to figure out how to get back home. Insert obligatory beautiful scene here, when she suddenly comes across Woodman playing some poker with some elves, and almost immediately loses Hilda in a bet. And what Hilda doesn't know is that he's not just playing with some elves, but with a giant who therefore kidnaps her for himself. Wow, Woodman. How dare you do Hilda dirty like that? Like, I get why, but still, wow. Turns out Woodman just needed her so that he could steal back his belongings from the giant. I love Woodman so much because he is just so brutally honest and stubborn that you just have to love him for it. Meanwhile, Alfred tries to show Joanna the letter that was sent by Hilda via elf mail earlier on when Woodman was still playing with the elves. Apparently that coffee was not very hot, otherwise Alfred would have probably been melting in that thing the moment he stepped in. So anyway, Alfred and Twig set off to find out what's up with Hilda, while her and the Woodman walk until it's late and they need to find a way to shelter and sleep for the night. Only Woodman would be willing to lay down smack dab in the middle of a forest. I mean, it does make sense, he's built entirely out of wood. But of course that's not going to cut it for Hilda, so they keep searching. Meanwhile again, Twig and Alfred try to find some answers about Hilda's whereabouts. And the only way he's going to be able to do it is by playing poker with some elves. I don't know why, but the immediate attitude switch from "you need to win for that information" to "please play with us" really cracked me up. Meanwhile, again and again, Hilda and Woodman discover some mysterious house in the woods. Get it? Cause the episode title? Woodman, being Woodman, decides to just head right inside without the consideration of who might be inside, only for them to discover that no one lives in it. And for what it seems like, it just feels like the perfect dream house for the both of them to stay and sleep at. Which they do, and it's not until the next morning where they figure out what's really going on. Turns out it's a magical house that will allow guests inside to be as comfortable as they want and have whatever they want, but the only catch is, they can't leave. They are stuck for eternity. I really love this scene where they're just running up some endless stairs, bottomless pits, and dead ends that only lead to stairs and doors. It's giving Inception vibes. Meanwhile, again, Alfred and Twig happen to be at the same spot where Hilda and Woodman were at, and inevitably that giant guy comes in. Oh no, whoever will save them, I sure do hope it's the Raven. Yes, every episode is better with him in it. After shooing the giant away, the three of them team up to find Hilda, and decide to go to that house that she just so happens to be in. And guess who they find? Hilda and Woodman. The day is saved, or at least until Raven steps into. Now they are all trapped inside. Their only way out? Overwhelm the magical house by asking for as many things as possible. Also, the other day I learned that the Raven asking for something shiny is not just some throwaway line and is actually a reference to how ravens and crows in folklore have a knack for shiny things. Is that actually true? Someone please let me know in the comments if it is. Anyways, Hilda's plan works, and she's now back home. On top of the reasons of why I think this episode is so good, another reason is how good the message is. Life should be all about cherishing the things you have now rather than putting yourself down for the things that you could have had. And it's always best to think of things that way than to trap yourself in a pit of eternal loneliness. This is such a great thing to teach, especially to kids, because at that point in our lives, we tend to take pretty much anything given to us for granted, and sometimes we ask and end up getting more than we may need. So it's important for us to remember, a home is a home, a family is a family, and the one thing that could never be topped with any item you desire is the love you share with someone who really matters to you. 10 out of 10. 1. The Bird Parade. Admittedly, I am a little biased when it comes to this episode because this is where we are introduced to the one and only Grey Raven. And the reason why it's so high up on this list is honestly because it's just really hilarious. Essentially, the plot of this episode is that Joanna is trying to convince her daughter to not be a lazy butthead and go outside. This is where we're introduced to Trevor and friends, the infamous little kid troublemakers that harass neighbors and throw rocks at birds. Things go wrong, however, when Trevor just so happens to hit a raven. Oh no, but not just any raven. This one talks. So she takes him home to safety where of course we don't really know who he is. Because he doesn't know who he is. And this is the point where the episode starts having two sides of the story. Alfred has to help Raven figure out where to go and who he is because Joanna decided to put the two out, not knowing that they are kind of important, while she and Hilda go out to explore the rest of the city. It's on this exploration that they discover the Bird Parade, a celebration of the Great Raven's annual arrival to the city. Knowing this, Hilda is obviously panicked and convinces her mom to try and find him again, but not without Trevor getting in the way of things. But eventually Hilda manages to help bring the Raven's memory back, which he turns out to indeed be the Great Raven. This episode is fantastic for several reasons. For one, Raven is absolutely hilarious. Imagine getting knocked in the head so hard that you can't even remember basic grammar, or whether or not you even like it. And Hilda's characteristic and friendly attitude towards people and things clashing with the complete opposite that is Trevor and his friends is such a funny and great dynamic. And it really gives off that new girl in town energy so well. And I like how this is the one episode in which Trevor's friends actually go against him on something. And maybe this is a small thing here, but I also really like the scene where Joanna explains to Hilda all the more interesting things that could be found in a seemingly boring new environment. It's a great reminder, especially to kids, that you should try to actively see the good and interesting in places you may not like at first. And is one of the first steps taken by Hilda for her to truly appreciate Trollberg for what it is throughout the season. This scene at the rooftop too is just so beautiful and heartwarming. A real talk between mother and daughter, trying to understand each other and why they feel the way that they do. Moments like these are brief, but damn do they make an episode even more memorable and awesome. Then we have this hilarious scene of Alfred just absolutely beating the shit out of Trevor. He ain't a fighter and yet he's still capable of giving kids some real pain. And of course we cannot forget about that spectacular Raven transformation scene in The Great Raven. Something that gets overlooked by a lot of people nowadays is that the Great Raven isn't even technically the Great Raven. He's just some Thunderbird that just so happened to be mistaken for the actual Great Raven. So much so that he's just decided to embrace it. And this ending shot of Hilda and Mom sitting on top of a wall to watch the parade, is just so good. So good in fact that they showed it again for the series finale. That's how you know just how truly magical the scene was. And honestly, that could describe this episode overall too. Beautiful, hilarious, fun, and exciting. All four elements to make this episode an obvious 10 out of 10 for me. Season 1 of Hilda is very much the reason of why I have continued to love the show to this very day. It just felt like one of those shows to me that I could really connect with and have a fantastic time with. Yeah, the ghost episode obviously stood out here as being the worst out of the season, but that's really only one blunder out of an otherwise amazing season. If not for episodes like the Bird Parade, I probably would have never gotten on board with the show as much as I do today. And despite these episodes being nearly 7 years old now, I'd still argue that mostly everything in the season still holds up really well today. Season 1 gets an overall rating of 8.5 out of 10. Now, while season 1 was great, obviously, it's the second season that I am most excited to talk about in this entire video, and is what I would argue is the best season of Hilda, by far. So let's get started. Number 13. The Jorts Incident. This was a pretty weird one because it basically tries to answer the question of what if 28 Days Later and Ghostbusters had a baby? Oh, and also was family friendly. Well, then you get this episode. Out of all the season 2 episodes, this one feels the least like Hilda because it's not so much Hilda or her friends that's the focus of this episode, but more rather some guy who got wielded with Tide Mice power and unknowingly just possessed dozens if not hundreds of people as a result of Hilda forgetting one extra step of her spell in season 1. It starts out with the Tide Mice entering Hilda's backpack and she accidentally bumps into some guy named Gil, which caused the mice to come out. Gil feeds them and he unknowingly becomes the subject of these mice, for which immediately afterwards he starts getting promoted everywhere left and right and being treated like a king, like he's freaking Jordan from the Wolf of Wall Street.
Go get a job at
Flip it.
McDonald's, cause that's where you
Flip it.
belong!
This lady did not need to jump out of the building like that. She ain't Tom Cruise. Like, are you serious? So after all this commotion, Kaisa asks Hilda, Frida, and David, cause he's a part of this too now, I guess, to come in and see the committee for an intervention with Hilda about the tide mice becoming a rampant problem in Trollberg again. They threaten Hilda to throw her into the juvenile void until Tildy steps in and starts yapping with them as a form of distraction. On a side note, what even is a juvenile void? Was the regular void from the 3rd episode not scary as is that we have to separate the normal void from the juvenile ones? Like, what sense does that even make? I'm still curious about this to this very day. Hilda and friends deliberate on where the mice could have been for a while until they manage to figure out that they are actually at the Jort's headquarters this entire time. And so Kaisa joins along to become Party City Ghostbusters to capture these tide mice. I can't play it here due to copyright reasons, but the song they play here during this montage is so freaking good. Like, it's definitely up there as one of my favorite songs to come out of this show's soundtrack. They managed to capture all but 2 from Gil, only for them to be captured also because I guess Jorts are just that delicious and easy to use as bait. They return back to the tower to perform a disenchantment spell. It works, and yay, the day is saved and no more funny tide mice business going on. And Hilda's only punishment is, instead of being put into the juvenile void, she only has to have mouse whiskers for the rest of the day. Which, I mean, it was already late in the day anyway, but whatever. I guess it all turned out well for Wanda, because now she's a zoologist and apparently loves being mauled in the face by tigers. Seriously, I have never actually seen anybody make this connection before, but it's so funny. What separates this episode versus one like The Witch is mainly for the reason I said earlier, in that it just doesn't really feel like Hilda. Sure, Hilda is in it and it has that spirit of adventure in it, but the storyline just feels too generic and safe, for lack of a better words. Even for characters like David, who are supposed to be this punching bag of jokes kind of guy, it just doesn't really elevate my enjoyment of this episode too much. It's just basically your average, we need to do something about this and fix it kind of adventure, and that's it. And while I am sure that this is satisfying enough to some, you know, nothing too quirky or crazy, just good fun all around, other episodes in this show have already proven to use this kind of thinking in a way that makes these adventures much more exciting and fun to see play out, and that's just not really what I felt like watching the Jorts incident. The only interesting thing about Gil is that he looks like David in the future. Like, the sauce just isn't there. This, along with the whole eating poop thing, and of course that scene with David blushing at Kaisa, are just stuff that gives this episode a not so great impression on me. It certainly has its funny moments and nothing was offensively bad, but it's definitely also just a watch once and forget it all kind of episode. 5.5 out of 10. Number 12. The Draugen. In an effort to get some spicy secrets behind Eric Alberg's motivations for the new changes to the city, Hilda sets out to talk to the Rat King, who is offering to help as long as she gives him a cod sandwich from the garbage. It's during the sandwich heist attempt that she comes across Woodman once again playing poker before getting kicked out since these guys are a bunch of Hilda gets her sandwich, but before she could leave, Woodman tells her that he's set out to find an ancient group of sea ghosts called the Draugen. Hilda, feeling as though they need helping from being stuck on board, decides to join Woodman in finding them. I always wondered why it's considered bad luck to bring a deer fox on a ship. I guess that's just how it goes. The weather is just too sunny today, and so Hilda decides to make a cloud spirit insecure, and that works. Come to find out, the Draugen seem pretty happy to be where they're at now, so what was the point of this trip? If you guessed that it was for Woodman to steal from them, then you beat absolutely correct! Hilda and Woodman don't exactly want to be turned into Draugen, so they take up upon a loophole that says that if the two can get to shore before the Draugen could, then they would be free. I don't even know why they would even bother doing this instead of just letting them die, consider that they don't even follow their own rules for the remainder of the episode. I guess they just decided to change their minds and think that maybe having these two come on board is a good idea after all. Although now that I think about it, how can someone like Woodman even die? We do see later on in the season that he just has his entire body eaten up by some sea monster, but he's still perfectly capable of being conscious through both his head and his body despite them being miles apart from each other. And I highly doubt that he has any kind of important organ or heart necessary to keep them functioning, consider that he's built entirely out of wood. The only way I could see his death happening is if his body and head are both so crushed into pieces that there would be no way for him to continue speaking or moving anymore. Basically a wood chipper. Anyway, the race happens and the Dragon get way ahead because of course they can. So Hilda gets an idea to make up for it with the help of the weather spirit again. Hilda and Woodman finish first, but does that deter the Dragon from chasing after them?
Absolutely flippin' not.
So of course they're forced to run for their lives because Woodman just cannot let go of that sextant that he wanted. Hilda comes up with the idea that since the Dragon originated from Trollberg, maybe taking them to the Trollberg cemetery could help bring them back to their families. And this crazy idea actually works, and we can actually get this pretty sweet ending of everyone reuniting with each other after centuries. Meanwhile, Albert tries to take credit for stopping the ghost ship mess when Hilda tries and fails to come up with something to expose him with. Rat King finally gets a sandwich but tells Hilda that he just doesn't know anything about Eric, and that's the end of the episode. If you had asked me a few years ago what I thought of this episode, I would have probably told you that I consider this episode to be one of season 2's best. But after giving it a rewatch a few more times, I think this is just overall okay. The best part of this episode is definitely the Dragon chase, although strangely enough, I remembered it being much more fun than this. There's nothing inherently bad about this episode per se, it's just that I don't really feel like being sympathetic to a bunch of ghosts who wanted to kill Hilda and Woodman throughout their entire journey up until the last minute. I mean, good on Hilda for doing the right thing, but still, The idea of a bunch of drowned ghost sailors haunting the seas on their ships does genuinely have a lot of potential though, and I wouldn't mind seeing some kind of prequel story of these guys or maybe other Draugen. I guess my biggest complaint about this episode is that it's not as fun as I wanted it to be, and it's not fleshing out the Draugen well enough to care about them for more than 2 seconds. Woodman does help make this funny with him and his shenanigans at the Salty Maiden though, as long as that montage of the two starting to set sail, so it's not all bad. Feeling like a 6 out of 10 on this one. Number 11. The Beast of Cauldron Island. The calm before the storm, that is the 50-year night. The episode continues from the old bells of Trollberg, where after a very old bell is rung, it starts to awaken some very strange creatures underwater that end up eating Woodman's body. Frida practices her spells when they find out that Alberg is planning to attack the Lindworm for supposedly attacking and bringing down ships. So their mission now is to investigate what's really going on and help the Lindworm to convince her to get the heck out of there before Cauldron Island turns out to be way more than an island. To be honest with you, I'm not really sure what to make of this episode. Was it fun? I guess. Was the story good? Sure. Nothing seems wrong with this episode, but something just feels kind of off about it that I can't really put my finger on. If I had to take a guess, it probably is because it's just basically a usual Hilda getting into trouble adventure episode, but without any real life lessons or anything gained out of it really. It feels not that much different from the Sparrow Scout episode in that sort of way, in that it just feels like one of those episodes where you don't really have to give it a watch if you don't want to, except for probably like the end. And yeah, I probably would still recommend watching it anyway because it essentially acts as like the tipping point to the real conflict that actually matters in the next episode with Hilda and her mom. Joanna just has had enough with the deception she's been put through by Hilda and decides to put her foot down and give Hilda the punishment that she needed. Not only is this part important for the episode afterwards, but it's also an interesting question to put in mind. Was Joanna justified in punishing Hilda? In my opinion, yeah. I think this is the best way she could have gone about it since she's given Hilda so much freedom, and yet she doesn't really try to tell the truth. And obviously Joanna herself didn't want this outcome to happen either, but aside from this very important detail in that cool Life of Hilda song that plays at the end of the episode, this episode is just, I liked it. But this is definitely not an episode I would consider putting near the top of the best Hilda episodes in my opinion. 6 out of 10. Number 10. The Eternal Warriors. Hilda and friends are on a camping trip for a couple days and decide they want to make their way to the Screaming Stones. David during this trip feels as though he's let down Hilda and Frida and tries to do something about it since he can't handle scary stories. Only for him to fall down like 5 stories and hit his head real hard. A little surprised that he isn't dead after that, honestly. He's rescued by this group of Vikings that Torgun has formed. They seek out the medallion of Sigurd from their enemies so that they have a way to become fearless. So David, thinking this is a good idea to become fearless himself, decides to join in on this idea, and oh boy, is it brutal. You know, I'm still very surprised this made it past the censors at Netflix, because if you've watched something like Amphibia before, you'll know that they had to delay an entire episode just so they can put a warning in front of it because of that one scene. Yet you have people getting their heads and arms and entire bodies chopped off and stabbed multiple times in just this one episode like it's a freaking game. And while yes, obviously Netflix and Disney are not the same company, TV networks have always been known to be very strict when it comes to their children's programming, and yet somehow they saw absolutely no problem with this on first glance. Hey, so Netflix, we want to make this new season of this kids show, but we wanted to know if it's okay to show people and even children getting slaughtered. Yeah, sure, why not? Cue that amazing Don't Let Your Love Fly Away that I unfortunately cannot play, and by the end of it all, they eventually do manage to get that medallion, and David is now fearless. The rest of the episode is just basically him being a jackass and getting killed by his enemies and having the swamp guy come in and save him and his Viking buddies. And learning that maybe it's okay to be fearful sometimes because it helps you not be stupid in the moment. I really like this episode, even though I don't really love that it's basically just making David the butt of the joke throughout it, but I also will admit that some of it was pretty funny, especially when he becomes this egotistical maniac who isn't afraid to tell people about Light Rock even though literally no one even cared or asked. The Vikings being forced to endlessly fight each other for probably an eternity at this point is probably the worst form of torture they could endure, and yet they're just cool about it. It gets to a point where this episode starts to not make any sense whatsoever, and yet I still managed to have a really good time with it. 7.5 out of 10. Number 9. The Troll Circle. This episode is kind of the prequel to the Stone Forest, which in itself is already a prequel to the Mountain King movie. In fact, this episode's opening scene is an adaptation of the original Stone Forest comic. Anyway, the plot of this episode is that Hilda wins the Safety Patrol essay contest after writing about her encounter with a troll. She's then formally invited to spend the day with Eric and Gerda in the blimp. Things start to tip, however, when they enter through a cloudy weather spirit storm and end up nearly becoming America in 2001. Okay, I'm sorry for that joke. When they're back on land, they then do some other troll investigations to make sure that the city remains safe, as well as just updating the safety protocol for some reason. After talking to the bellkeeper in his encounter with the troll, they then decide to visit a circle of trolls that Hilda had spotted the day before. And I guess Eric just decides it would be cool to take photos of himself flexing with them. Look, I have a lot to say about Eric shortly, but you can already tell just from this one episode how huge his ego is. Predictably, these trolls come back to life during the sundown, and I really wish Hilda hadn't saved Eric here because it would have really been funny to see him get crushed by a troll. Yet they still don't want to leave because of a camera, which causes even more problems for them. God, who let this man have a job? They take shelter under someone's house before eventually making it safe to a vitro tunnel, and the episode ends by essentially revealing that this is going to be the man that will be the antagonist throughout the season. Okay, first of all, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but I actually found the best part of this episode to be the introduction of Eric Alberg. And I find that both incredibly genius and frustrating at the same time, because on the one hand, the writers for this episode did such a great job at introducing him as this brutal dictator-esque officer, ensuring that nothing is acting up in the city. If you thought Victoria was evil, Eric's motivations for his hatred towards trolls is purely so that he could have more brownie points to add to his name. He could have said, oh, I just wanted to protect the city, but no, he just straight up admits that he's just in it for the game. If that ain't evil to you, then I don't know what is. This man really doesn't frick around and probably would shoot a kid in the face if they were caught carrying a baby troll. But on the flip side, I just don't like how full of himself he is. It is not worth risking yours or other people's lives over a bunch of cringy ass photos that you took. And this type of stubbornness is why I both love and hate Eric at the same time. He's probably one of the best unlikable antagonists in the show, if that makes any sense. With all that said, his performance did not quite help in making this episode amazing or anything. It did definitely get a couple of chuckles out of me, especially with them going back and forth about the type of sandwich that the bellkeeper ate. But other than the points I've just mentioned, I guess the only notable thing to mention here is that this is also the start of the trust issues theme that goes on with Hilda and her mom throughout the season. And aside from that, it's a really good and exciting episode overall, and I'm not disappointed whatsoever that season 2 started out with this. 7.5 out of 10. Number 8. The Replacement. So my impressions on this episode initially was that it wasn't exactly the most interesting episode that could come out of a season like this. And while I still find that to be kinda true, it's also just a lot more funny and exciting than I had remembered. The plot of this episode is probably one of the simplest things we've seen thus far. Some guy named Alvin in the Chipmunks shows up one day announcing himself to replace Alfred, alleging that he had exaggerated his reports, and Alfred now has to find a way to stay in Trollberg. A lot of what makes this episode work for me comes down to the comedic timing that it has to offer. Although even that can get a little bogged down by trying to be more serious than this episode really needs to be. But luckily a good amount of this does have those hilarious moments that makes this episode more enjoyable than it should have been. Like the fact that no one could tell who Alfred was for a moment, or when he jumped out of a freaking lighthouse and Alvin just makes that face. Gerda and all the other humans though being absolutely convinced that these are all some crazy spirits has to be one of the funniest things to come out of the season. The thing I still don't really get is how all of this somehow convinced Alvin that he was cool with Alfred and that he believes his reports after all, when this adventure in comparison to the ones that they mentioned earlier is pretty mundane. But hey, it's a happy ending, and the humor and banter that these elves showed on screen ultimately made this a pretty fun watch all around. 7.5 out of 10. Number 7. The Stone Forest. This episode is special because not only is it significantly longer than all the other episodes in this list, but it's also the only episode in this season that is a direct adaptation of the original novels, also titled The Stone Forest. And for accuracy's sake, I mean, come on, this is Hilda we're talking about. It is pretty true to form, except for the fact that I'm still mad that they cut the Raven out of this episode. Like, that actually could have been such a goated cameo when he picks her up like that, but God, just thinking about it just makes me so angry. But yeah, as a whole, while it's not as funny as the rest of the episodes in this season, that scene where Eric turns into a human fly just freaks me out more than anything. I still very much enjoyed the dynamic that we get to see between Hilda and Joanna. This episode essentially jumpstarts getting to know the more vulnerable side of each other, because you have Joanna as the single mother looking out for her kid, and the child that just wants to do more out there. I can see where both sides are coming from, although Hilda dissing Joanna like that was just pretty unnecessary. I'm totally not biased or anything. This is also where we really start to see a more different side of trolls, where instead of assuming that they would just be up to eat us, well, most of the time, they can actually have their own feelings and sense to know that these are living beings that shouldn't just be seen as toys. While I may not be as explicit about it since, well, that's what the movie is for, I do like the subtlety of it instead of just having it be said out loud for us to realize. I don't know, maybe I'm just not a big fan of trolls being able to talk. As someone who deals with a lot of color grading, I can't help but point out that there were points in this episode that seemed weirdly oversaturated at first, and then it just transitions back to normal. This has always bothered me a lot when watching this episode, and this era can still be found on Netflix to this very day. The best moments of this episode definitely has to be some of the more cozier scenes where they just sit around a fire and just chill for a moment. Not only do these types of scenes establish to the viewers the complexity that trolls have in their behaviors, but it also comes off as very sweet, very Hilda-like, a form of relaxing from the rest of the wild episode, and that's not to say those moments were great either. Like, they definitely were for sure. But this episode's very nature is that it's supposed to act as a prelude more than anything, so it's not exactly trying to break any ground here. It just kind of feels like your average Hilda adventure up until the very last minute of the episode. Also, this episode gets points for turning Eric into a bug for most of his appearance, and this sick-ass explosion that may or may not be a reference to the Hindenburg disaster. 8 out of 10. Number 6. The Old Bells of Trollberg. To this day, I am still amazed with how much Hilda and the gang managed to get away with their devious acts in this episode. The bell is just ringing too darn often and loud lately, causing not only the wolves to be affected, but also practically everyone within the vicinity of Trollberg. Even Nowhere Space. Even the Braga family can't even get a good braid. Oh, the horror! So Hilda decides to investigate, and that's when they discover the reason for all of this bell ringing. Automated bell systems designed to go off every hour of the day. As if that's not already bad enough, the bellkeeper informs Hilda that the systems are set to go off at every bell tower in the city in a couple of days during a ceremony. She cannot let this happen and sets off a plan to ambush safety patrol's bells by essentially committing terrorism against their own government so they don't end up doing things they'll later regret. Man, this episode aged really well. I've already talked about just how insane this whole stunt was in the first episode of my Hilda Iceberg series, but even besides that, the fact that these kids were able to successfully fight their way into stopping Albrecht's plans is an embarrassment to the city's government. But yes, they go through with this plan, and despite their attempts to do backups and have a clean operation, it fails anyway due to Hilda and the bellkeeper cranking the volume higher than the intro to Sonic Adventure. Everyone is now at peace, but then they start to ring every bell in the city, and in the process of that, we get a glimpse of who we might have awakened next. This is another fun episode. For the crimes against humanity that these guys committed, I'm glad they still went through with it anyway, because like, if I had heard all of those bells ring at literally every hour of the day, I would be trying to rebel that too, because that'd be annoying as hell to deal with. Not much I can say here besides what I've already said here and on my Iceberg video, besides the fact that this is definitely a recommended watch. 8 out of 10. Number 5. The Windmill. Success can be one hell of a drug, even if it is achieved at the expense of others. And that's exactly what Victoria Van Gale does in this episode. Hilda one day wants to go to Frida's and asks Tonto if she could take her via nowhere space. He says no, and so she's forced to go with it anyway. During this little ranting session with the gang for a Sparrow Scouts activity, they notice some renovations being done to the land when they just so happen to spot a scarlet-capped warbler. So they make a break for it and ended up in the presence of none other than Victoria. Hilda and friends are invited inside as guests, but the entire time David is just suspicious as hell. And his suspicions were eventually correct, as she's been keeping this artificial looking Nissa around. But even with all that being done well and said, they decide to start helping Victoria out with cleaning the place anyway. The next day is when the real crazy stuff starts happening, as while all this has been good and well, David still cannot keep his suspicions about Victoria down and ends up finding some papers hidden in the house. It turns out that these have been plans by Victoria to create a portal to nowhere space on her own with the help of the windmill and this crazy artificial Nissa of hers. Unfortunately, that Nissa steals most of the papers away from David, which means that it's now up to him and Hilda to get back there and stop her as fast as possible. All the while, I'm just imagining Frida taking well over 2 hours just to get that book she really wanted, only for it to be the only one to tell her that she needs to get the F out. The timing in this is pure comedy gold. Only Victoria would be willing to tie up kids just to go through with their plans. This is why I could never really understand why some people might think she's just a bit misunderstood, because her past 2 shenanigans now have risked the lives of innocent people and creatures just because she felt like wanting to be the woman to do some breakthrough discoveries, when we all know that's complete BS. She absolutely knows the risks that come with making this portal by becoming a mini black hole of sorts, and yet she just does it anyway for science. She is the evil villain of the Hilda series, and her reputation isn't really improved until the next season. But it doesn't really matter in the end, because Victoria got exactly what she wanted. She's in nowhere space, and for Hilda and friends, they did all they could to convince her out of it. It's a really bittersweet ending, because we have been told numerous times in this episode that Nissa, and only Nissa, should have a right to have a place in nowhere space and that is bad for humans, and yet Victoria just feels so hopeful about it in the end. It's really one of those episodes to me that just gets you thinking. What's going to happen to Victoria now? Will she make a home for herself out here or die alone? It gives us a hint that maybe everything will work out after all. While this episode isn't as amazing as the storm from season 1, it's still a really exciting and eerie take on the show that's rare to come by at this point in the show. And I think for that, I'm gonna hand it an 8.5 out of 10. Number 4. The Yule Lads. Maybe it's because it's the holiday season when I'm watching this, but I think my overall thoughts on this episode have been significantly more positive as time has gone by. The plot is as simple as it gets, where you have the Yule Lads showing up to town one day to find some naughty children. They kidnap those children and I guess adults too, so that they are able to feed Gryla on Sunstanstill Day. At least until Hilda and friends force them into an intervention and basically expose them for being naughty little guys. The thing I really like about this episode is that it's one of those few Christmas/holiday specials that actually draws a line between people they consider to be naughty versus nice. There always seems to be this thought especially present in children that if you were to do anything considered to be naughty, then you're therefore automatically considered to be a naughty child. It seems innocent and playful at first, but children can really take this kind of thing seriously enough to a point where some might be overwhelmed and nervous to do even one thing considered to be naughty, and Hilda basically says, screw you and all your holiday rules bullcrap. You shouldn't get to decide who is truly naughty. Even when it comes to people like Trevor coming in and screwing things up for Hilda and her friends, the show still stands by this message that yes, people and children who do naughty things do exist, but we shouldn't have to always be an authority to label them as punishment for it, and instead just educate ourselves and learn to do better as people. I think Joanna sums it all best here.
Sure, you do the wrong thing sometimes, but we all do. That doesn't make us bad people, it just makes us people.
See, this is the thing that I just love so much about Hilda. Sure, it's a fantasy world that has fantasy creatures in it, but at its very core, it focuses a lot on the humanity of not just these creatures, but also the very people we see on a day-to-day basis. It's a really heartwarming and nice message that will especially give kids more comfort and ease to give themselves a break, because the majority of them are not naughty kids or bad kids, but just kids. The performance from Andy Serkis as Kurt was really fun, and I also really like seeing the Yolats in action too. They are just so cartoony and wacky that you almost have to love them for it and almost might forgive them for kidnapping people to get eaten. Actually, no, not really. That's still pretty messed up. My favorite part of this episode is definitely the ending scene. Like, you just can't deny just how truly beautiful and tear-jerking this part was, especially with David handing Hilda the gift to her like that and Hilda giving that to her mom. It's so beautiful and wonderful to see. Too bad I wouldn't make it past the movie. Speaking of David, I thought he was really funny in this too. And my only major critique that I have with this episode is that hearing Trevor's voice for the first time here compared to his season 1 voice felt very weird, although that is a bit of a hypocritical statement considering that I'm recording this part nearly a year after I started working on this freaking video. But apart from that, I just really enjoy watching this so much. It's funny, spooky, and heartwarming, pretty much all the things that go into making a great Hilda episode. 9 out of 10. Number 3. The Witch. When I see people talk about what are season 2's best episodes, I find it unfortunate that this episode doesn't get brought up as often as it should. Hilda and Frida go to the library to find some books about the Albrecht family when they notice that something isn't right with the librarian, and so they decide to investigate for themselves. We already know the secret room exists, but they've come to discover that this leads to one of only several secret rooms. And later they end up finding this library's biggest secret of them all, the Witch's Tower, a central hub for all witches and librarians in Trollberg alike. Knowing this, they assume that the librarian they're familiar with must be some kind of witch, and they're right. After sneaking into this place, we learn that Kaisa, who is the librarian's real name, is actually overdue in finding and returning a book back to the library. And if she doesn't return it by the end of the exact 30-year mark, then she's going to be thrown into the void along with Hilda and Frida. I agree with Kaisa here because, well, yes, she is the keeper of the books, but why is she the one to get punished for someone else stealing the book from them? And why is it specifically 30 years? That seems like a relatively short time to retrieve a book from someone, especially since by that time they'll most likely still have been alive. At least raise it up to like 60 years so you can steal the book back from them when they're most likely already dead or too old to care. Regardless, it's the three of them's job now to go find this missing book, and it shouldn't be that much of a problem because Kaisa already knows exactly who this person is. And that detail is going to become very important as the episode progresses. In order to get this Matilda, they must first go through this maze, which apparently most witches don't even end up completing. After slashing some dune worms with her sword forward, Hilda and the gang manage to complete the first course and get on with the rest of the maze. This montage of them going through each of these, especially with the help of Frida, is so much fun to watch. I'm just amazed for someone who supposedly doesn't do magic, ends up carrying the backs of both Hilda and Kaiser to get through this. Either by being really smart or really reckless. See, even Hilda wouldn't be willing to risk her life running through that invisible floor. I still don't get what she was supposed to even do at this second one here. She could have written the entire B-movie script and that would have been the answer to their problems. I also really appreciate that this episode calls out the stereotype that witches are all just about casting spells and magic and not enough about the skill and knowledge that one must have in order to truly qualify as one. Outside of shows like The Owl House, other kids shows rarely if at all like to touch on the subject of witches and magic as if it's a good thing, because inevitably they'll face the backlash that comes with it from stupid religious groups, and I never really understood why. Witches and their magic are not real, and if your kid decides to do some stupid be a grown-up and take responsibility for your and their kids' actions instead of blaming the completely inoffensive children's show. Anyways, it's time for the final stage to fight this supposed ice monster, and while Kaiser is off to do that, Hilda and Frida head inside where they find Tildy? Yeah, the lady from the Bird Parade episode. Is it just me or has she gotten strangely shorter? But yes, they do find her and they ask to get that book back from her as quickly as possible. They then ask about what that monster in front of her house was, and as Tildy explains, it's actually a landscaper, and tries to see what's going on with it and this librarian, only to find Eldred and Kaiser playing chess together. So this is the point where Kaiser comes across Tildy, and as it turns out, she used to be a student of hers, and the reason for not being able to have the courage to go get it up until now is because she felt like she would disappoint Tildy by admitting that she isn't really the witch that she wanted her to be, and that her true calling is to just be a librarian. And that makes a lot of sense from the events seen in the maze, as despite her seeming to be more experienced of the three, Frida seemed to be doing all the heavy lifting for them and felt as though admitting this to her would be embarrassing. But the thing is, not all things turn out the way people want them to go. And by the end of it all, she's just happy that Kaiser's happy about being any old librarian. As sweet as this is, they still need to retrieve that book from Tildy, and it's not until they learn that her familiar has been eating up all her stuff, including her book, for possibly the past 30 years? All that time, and she's just now discovering this? Or maybe she forgot, I don't know, but still, that's both really hilarious and kinda wild. They teleport back to the Witch's Tower, and it's there that they learn that they were exactly 1 minute and 52 seconds late and must now be put through the void despite literally having Tildy herself show up and say it's all cool. RIP my man Lloyd. So now they have to escape this void hole, and so what do? Get those Duneworm, plants inside and have as many of them show up as possible, so it not only deters the eye hands, but also keeps them afloat, and their mission is officially complete. This episode is easily Hilda at one of its most exciting. Everything in this episode is so fun. Entering through the Witch's Tower was fun, going through Tilly's maze was fun, fighting out the magic hands with magic is fun. Even the songs in this are fun. It's all fun, no Pharrell Williams. And it does all of that whilst giving us some much needed and interesting backstory behind Kaiser and witches like her. Plus, Frida having her work paid off by becoming a witch herself makes for a very satisfying and strong ending. On top of the great message that sometimes it's okay to fail at certain things and you shouldn't push yourself just to meet what you might think is someone else's expectations. I really wish we had more witch episodes like these. Hell, I would love for some kind of spin-off where it's just Frida learning to become a witch with Tildy and possibly Kaiser in the mix. It's a great concept that I really wish the show had explored more often, since episodes like these make it so interesting and fun to watch. 9.5 out of 10. Number 2. The 50-Year Night. Where this and the next episode are placed on this list should be an absolute surprise to nobody. And I will gladly die on this hill when I say that this episode to this very day is still one of the best to come onto television, period. and has cemented Hilda as a show not just known for having good vibes, but one that can exceed everyone's expectations by having some of the most groundbreaking writing and storytelling ever executed on an animated show. Hilda is grounded from the Cauldron Island episode, so in the middle of playing some cards, she notices that Mr. Austenfeld disappears and reappears almost instantaneously and decides to go downstairs to investigate. After opening up a package and committing a felony, she discovers a whole bunch of newspapers and decides to open it, only for her to get transported in the same place back in time. She sneaks in the bar after finding out that Austenfeld and a bunch of other hymns decide to go inside too. There we are introduced to young Austenfeld and Tildy, who talk to each other and get along during this absolutely beautiful scene. And then that's when the Austenfelds notice her and they try to catch her. Once we come back to the present day, Hilda learns that the man that they were looking at was actually his former self. And he wanted a way to relive that memory all those years ago because he just couldn't put down the regret he has by not getting the courage to talk to Tildy again. Hilda wants that to change for the better and decides to go back to convince his former self to catch up to Tildy once and for all. And it actually ends up working. But now there's a huge problem. What she just did just created a whole bunch of new paradoxes and alternate universes that shouldn't have existed. Summoning the Time Worm. Hilda's other selves desperately try to warn her about this until eventually she and Austenfeld try to head back, only for him to get eaten by the Time Worm once again. Hilda goes through a bunch of different timelines trying to outrun this thing and heads straight to Tildy. She lets Hilda know that the reason for this happening is for the reasons she explained earlier, but also that the version of her in Austenfeld we see now shouldn't even exist. The only way to stop it? Destroy the original copy that Tildy had enchanted all those years ago. She too, just like Austenfeld, wanted to relive those memories for a type of love that was never meant to be. Such a brutal and sad way to go, especially since death is such a touchy subject for these types of shows. You see fake outs happen all the time, even outside of kids shows, but it's still a shock to me that they would even go as far as to really let you settle in the fact that these people will die and we just need to accept that for the greater good. Some things are just not meant to be, and trying to fix those mistakes by reliving them and changing the past is never the answer, no matter how regrettable they might be. It is a dark and obviously very uncomfortable topic that not a lot of people are ready to hear, but one that is so carefully and amazingly executed by the grief that these characters go through and the harsh reality that they have to face with their decisions. This is easily Hilda at its darkest, yet it comes across as having something of importance that we could all benefit from. And that is, it's always important to move forward and never continue to let yourself down for what you think you could have achieved. Because for that one person that slips through your fingers, there will always be another one waiting for you when the time is right. What else do you even want me to say that hasn't already been said a million times about this episode, man? This episode is just so f***ing incredible and feels like everything a perfect Hilda episode should be. Yeah, this is easily a 10 out of 10. It's funny, exciting, beautiful, heartwarming, heartbreaking, and it had me sobbing by the end of it. But predictably not as much as this next episode. Number 1. The Deer Fox. What hasn't been said about this episode that's already been said a billion more times already? It is so incredibly amazing, but God almighty, it cannot be stated just how amazing this episode really is. Where the previous episode talked about regrets of letting go what could have been a loved one, this one is about actually losing a loved one, even if it's just for a little bit. Twig starts having dreams of being in this magical place during his sleep, and during the midst of feeling neglected by Hilda, Hilda and her friends try to recover David's shoes out of all things. I love how Frida is like, okay, we don't need to argue again, as if the people making this episode knew not to make the same mistake they did with the ghost episode. That right there doesn't get talked about as much and already honors this episode a 10 out of 10 in my humble opinion. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The trio are unsuccessful and another night passes and Twig feels like he's being trapped, so what does he do? Sneak out and try to make his own way to the forest, but not without some obstacles in his way. The next morning, Hilda tries to find him in the house, but he's just not there. And it's not until Alfred notifies them that it's possible that he could have tried escaping outside. Tensions rise as Twig is still on his own and they still can't figure out where he is, and at this point, they make the realization that he's possibly outside of Trollberg. Meanwhile, Twig chases a rabbit down, but not without trying to escape this stupid red wolf thing. God, I hate that thing so much. Twig does manage to hide and escape from the wolf, but not without realizing that he's where he used to live with Hilda. Man, I hate it when this episode tries to remind Twig of her existence while being all alone because it's just so damn sad. This episode is constantly tugging at your heartstrings the more they have these two apart from each other, and I hate it! And that's not even to mention the flashbacks of younger Twig and Hilda too. Like, they really wanted to make people cry during this episode. And we'll get to there, but I just felt like mentioning it here because while we have always assumed that these two were practically family together, these scenes are so important in emphasizing the reason of why we should care and appreciate just how significant they are for each other. It just gives off this magical feeling of nostalgia and happiness that you get when you meet someone who's just that special to you. And it's beautiful, okay? I feel like I'm repeating myself with my words here, but I'm struggling to fathom words together on just how magical scenes like these are. You could tell from the moment they met, they were meant for each other, and their chemistry would only grow stronger as they helped each other more. Hilda and Joanna go back to their old place and find out through the elves that Twig might actually be closer than they think. The two then decide to visit Woodman for help, but with no luck. It's not until they visit a particular spot where it's not only where those mysteriously looking lights came from, but it's also where little Hilda's life was saved by Twig. So they decide to cross it to find those mysteriously looking lights, and guess who shows up? It's that stupid freaking fox again. Oh my god! When it hit the floor, I genuinely hoped it died and spent the rest of its afterlife in the deep pits of hell for trying to kill these two. But anyways, Hilda and Twig reunite, but that's also when the three of them discover something they thought would never happen. Seeing another deer fox in person. When they walk up to investigate, they discover an entire flay of deer foxes ready to go up in the magical sky. Twig had his chance to come up just like the rest of them, but decided that it was worth it to save the person who saved him instead, and now this was probably his second and last chance to do so. Be up there with his real family or continue to stay loyal to the people that first offered him a loving home. Twig ultimately decides to choose his path with the other deer foxes, leaving Hilda devastated and heartbroken. But Hilda's calling was just too much for Twig and decided the right thing to do was to go back to where he truly belonged, cementing the two as not just best friends forever, but an unbreakable family. The trio finally managed to get back David's shoes, even though David has since already had new shoes, so what the hell even was that for? And it felt a little bit like inappropriate comedic timing for something so sad to happen so soon, but I guess that's it. The ending scene with little Twig and Hilda was needed to make me have a big stupid smile on my face by the end of this episode. Again, words truly cannot put together just how magical, fantastic, sad, and amazing the deer fox really is. Everything from the flashback scenes to the emotions you feel with these characters, to having some of the most beautiful score the show has had to date, and of course acknowledging that The Ghost wasn't as good of an episode presumably. There just isn't another episode in this series that is quite like this one. If you're looking to watch an episode of Hilda that you can just put on and have a cozy and calm time with, then don't put this one on because it will just leave you in a sobbing mess by the end of it. I think it goes to show without saying once more or at all that the deer fox is much deserving of a 10 out of 10. Probably an 11 if I had a score for that. Yo, what's up? I'm Ray from the future. The far future. Yeah, if you're wondering why I look a bit older and sound older too compared to the last time you've seen me, that's because I've literally been putting off making this video for well over a year now, and I'm just now being able to finish it. So if you're already this far in the video, please make sure to like and subscribe to this video because this took so freaking long to make. Season 1 to me has already cemented Hilda as a show to remember out of Netflix's catalog. But I feel like the biggest reason of why Hilda continues to be a big part of who I am and why I still talk about it today is because of just how truly amazing season 2 ended up being. And even for some of the more okay episodes, there's still a lot to like about each and every single one of them. None of these episodes felt like a slog to go through, and I can see the appeal of why someone might enjoy a certain episode over another. But undoubtedly, one thing that I'm sure a lot of people can get behind is the 50-year night and the Deer Fox being at or near the very top of the best Hilda episodes ever. Like, come on, it's just hard to argue with that. But even then, there's still a lot to love and like about this season. And I still think this is absolutely Hilda's best season to come out of the show, just from how much lore, fun, and comedy it has to offer. I can't give it anything lower than like a 9 out of 10, man. I did consider giving the entire season a 10 at first, but I just felt like there were definitely some moments in this that kind of bogged down my enjoyment of the season just a tad bit. Mostly in the Jorts episode, but other than those moments, this season is a freaking masterpiece, and to me, this just feels like a testament for how TV animation should be done. Now, when it comes to season 3, a lot of my opinions on this season, I'm sure a lot of people know by now, but I've always been pretty harsh on it, because the last time I gave it a watch, I was just not very impressed with the whole thing. But since some of my opinions on it have changed quite a bit from the review I did last time, and this will be the second time ever I watched the entire season since 2023. Will my opinions on these episodes change for the better, or will I still think that this is the lowest point of the show? Let's not waste any more time and get on with the ranking. But before we do that, let's talk about the Mountain King movie first, since while it technically isn't a part of the actual show, it is a very important continuation that acts as a bridge between the cliffhanger from season 2 to the events seen in season 3. Now, my feelings on this movie has been kind of all over the place the many times that I've seen it in the past 5 or so years. Jesus, it's been that long already. On the one hand, it serves as a pretty great ending to the whole troll arc from the past 2 seasons, but it's not exactly the Toy Story 3 of the Hilda franchise that I claimed it to be. Just like the Stone Forest, this is another adaptation from the original graphic novel series, which is still actually the latest one to come out. The original book is still an excellent read, and the movie isn't really too far off from it. Let me get started with some of my complaints about this movie first. I have 2 major complaints that have always kind of bogged down my enjoyment of this film by a little bit. The first being that while including David and Frida are nice touches on the surface, they don't ultimately contribute much to the story, and if anything, feels like they're just used to extend the runtime of this thing. That's primarily because the 2 of them were never featured at all in the original novel. It was strictly a story between Hilda, her mom, Trilla, and Baba. And yes, Eric in there too, so it's already pretty difficult to try and justify having David and Frida in this too. The most significant thing they did in this was organize a protest around the discrimination of trolls, and everything else after that is just them fooling around with magic or getting involved with things they know they shouldn't be a part of. This is not for me to say that these 2 shouldn't have been included at all, but rather the majority of the runtime this movie gives to them feels like it's unnecessary because their involvement does not change what ultimately ends up happening in the film. Another major complaint is that this movie honestly just looks boring. You have a big chunk of it taking place in the dark or in the Trolls Cave, and while I understand that they gotta keep it in line with the show's art style, you would have think that they could have done something just a bit more interesting to look at instead of every single scene looking exactly the same. And it's a shame because there are definitely some great looking compositions in this, like taking Eric's office as an example. The light coming from that window and having it then bounce off to different objects in the room, or this wide shot of Hilda jumping back to her mom, like there's absolutely some great ideas they have here. But unfortunately, a good amount of it just ends up making the movie look dull and flat. Even the Stone Forest episode had more interesting looking scenes than this. Now, about what I do like for this movie, the best part definitely is the climax with Trundle and the group of trolls coming in and trying to charge inside of Trollberg. Like, you can tell everybody wanted this to be as epic as possible, and this is definitely that 100%. Whoever animated Hilda in this scene deserves a 10x raise from their paycheck, because holy crap, look how freaking smooth that is! Definitely my favorite shot from the movie, because that alone looks so freaking cool. The thing they do afterwards to honor the trolls was a very, very sweet thing for them to do, and also a great way to end the widespread fear of trolls, once and for all. I guess in a way, my statement on this being the Toy Story 3 of the Hilda franchise still kind of holds up true today because trolls were undoubtedly a key part of what makes the series what it is. So having their story be concluded with this is like Andy choosing to give up all his toys to Bonnie. What do you even end up doing from here? Keep the whole thing going, of course. And that's exactly why Toy Story 4 and 5 exists, and Season 3 exists as well. Even if some people choose to believe that their existence shouldn't have happened because of the ending they decided to go with. Another thing I like about this movie is that it feels a lot more grounded as a story compared to most episodes you see in the show. And there have only really been a few episodes from this series that chose to take this route, those being of course the 50-Year Night and the Deer Fox. You just feel so much emotion from these characters than you normally get from just about everyone. Hilda being the scared and afraid one, wondering how she's going to be able to get back with her mom also being scared and afraid of what type of danger her daughter might possibly be in. Even David and Frida, while they ultimately don't do much in the end, still seems genuinely concerned and mean well for Hilda. And Eric, well... he's just himself in this, although I swear they turned up his stupid level to about like 100x in this, because how are you this delusional in thinking that these trolls couldn't have absolutely destroyed an entire city if they really wanted to? There is genuinely a lot to like and love about this movie aside from all that I mentioned already, like that sick ass intro, the lore we get to see about trolls, although I'm still not totally thrilled on them being able to speak English. Trundle for how evil he is a seriously great villain in this, and it is definitely pretty silly and funny at times, just like how Hilda usually is. Overall, if the show had just ended with this, I definitely would not be mad about it at all, because as it stands right now, Hilda had technically already ended with this with the books. So I feel like in more ways than what season 3 had, this ending definitely feels a lot more thought out to the point where it could absolutely stand on its own for how the series would be remembered moving forward. But alas, we ended up with season 3 anyway, so while the story of the trolls just ended, there's still a lot more left to unpack and conclude for everyone else. 8.5 out of 10. Number 8. Strange Frequencies. Just why? Why does this episode exist? This season is already cut significantly short because of the decision that was made by Netflix, and they chose to go with another Nissa episode? This is like the 4th one we've gotten now. You would have thought that the people making this knew the limitations they had, so maybe they could have done something more interesting with some other obscure character, like, I don't know, Louise, the Bellkeeper, or even the Mara. Nobody cares about the Nissa this much to the point where it was absolutely necessary to make a whole other episode about them again. I wouldn't even mind it so much if the actual episode was any good, but it's just some mediocre plot about them learning to share with each other. What the hell is this? Sesame Street? Almost everything in this episode just feels like an incredible waste of time, but it's still a necessary watch if you're seeing it for the first time, because it also happens to have this very important subplot where Hilda is going through her radio trying to find out if her dad is out there somehow. Why wasn't this entire episode about that? Or better yet, just scrap this episode in general and just include the important bits right after the Forgotten Lake episode or right before the Fairy Isle. Because the Nissa plot just feels like a half-baked excuse to somehow fit in this much more interesting story. That's why I'm not just straight up calling this the worst Hilda episode either, because being able to see the events unfold right before things get going with the Fairy Isle is something that I really enjoyed seeing and would rather just prefer to rewatch these parts again instead of having to watch the snooze fest that is the rest of this episode. And it's not even that the Nissa plot is necessarily bad per se, like it's definitely nowhere near as offensive as the ghost was, but it just feels so unneeded and uninteresting to the point where I much prefer if this episode just did not exist at all. It really isn't all that funny. Just about nothing gets done about the Nissa's issues up until we abruptly cut to Hilda just having to have this idea of a library, and it's just so boring and dumb to watch. Tonto acts like a friggin' 2-year-old in this, like there's no way this is what all of these Nissa acted right before everything hit the fan. I just don't understand, if they already knew the circumstances of the amount of episodes they were dealing with, why would they choose to make a decision that's as baffling as this? Like I said, a good amount of this episode was already dedicated to solving the mysteries of this radio thing, so just cut all of this stealing shenanigans and just go in full force with that. This episode just makes me so angry because of how frustrating its existence is. It's not exactly bad, nor is it exactly good in its entirety. Some moments are really good, whilst others are just not. There are hints given to us about the message possibly coming from in or around nowhere space, but it just doesn't do anything with that information up until the very end. Like, I don't get it. I feel like then it would make more sense to gather everyone in there instead of just having it be in some building. This episode is just confusing, dumb, and not very fun, and the only reason I'm not willing to give this any kind of a negative score is because the side plot is definitely the most interesting and actually good thing to come out of this episode. 5 out of 10. Number 7. The Job. This is the episode where we finally get to see Hilda's dad for the first time ever in the series. And yeah, do I have a lot of thoughts about him. Firstly though, let me just say right off the bat that this episode felt perfectly serviceable to me. It feels a lot more akin to the Train of Tophaten episode where everyone gets used to something new and by the end of it, they end up having this big adventure to top everything off. Except for the fact that they kind of fail at that. But we're not here to talk about the job they took off some guy to steal some troll's treasure, no. The big discussion surrounding this episode is obviously Anders, introduced to be Hilda's dad in this episode. As someone who has made a lot of jokes and comments dogging on this guy, this is going to sound crazy coming from someone like me, but genuinely speaking, I don't think he's as bad of a character as everyone says he is to be. Okay, wait, just hear me out for a second. I think the biggest issue I feel like most people have with him more so has to do with the relevance he has towards this season as a whole. Because honestly, for the most part, it felt like his existence only came up to be because the showrunners gathered around a board meeting one day and said, hey, so we need to incorporate Hilda's dad into this somehow and we can't make it the bellkeeper because that would be way too obvious. Who's got ideas for him? How about we make the dad look like Brad Pitt? Oh my god. You're a genius. Someone go hand this guy an Emmy. Jokes aside though, as a character himself, yes, he did kinda leave Hilda for many years just to show up unannounced on a random Friday. Yeah, he's kind of a low-life 40-year-old guy with no job, but I think it would be a bit harsh to ask for the worst for him because at the very least, he still does genuinely care about Hilda and wanting to be a part of her life even if it may not be so obvious at first. And I'm not talking about it in a way that's similar to what happened with Luke Pearson where it's like, oh well, Anders is actually a self-insert of him to apologize for cheating on his wife and leaving his kids. Which first of all, no, Anders is not a self-insert for Luke Pearson. I don't know why people keep having this ridiculous idea considering that Luke already exists in the show. Second, this episode was already written years before that whole scandal came about, and Philippa herself literally lended her voice to one of the newer characters in this season as well. She voiced Tapuka. Okay, just thought I'd get that out there. I'm willing to give someone like Anders the benefit of the doubt if we got to see him around more often, but the problem is that the show doesn't really do that. For all of us watching, he might as well just be some random dude who showed up to town one day, everyone liked him for a day, and that was pretty much it. Yes, he is still pretty relevant in terms of story for the episodes moving on from here, but if anything, he's used more as an accessory to wrap the whole fairy stuff together, for which by then he stops becoming anything of importance. The show fails to convince us that he's supposed to be this obviously likable character, and I think that's why people have chosen to have a disliking for him rather than simply stating that he's just a bad character. Anyway, for the episode alone, like I said, it's perfectly acceptable. It was sweet getting to see Hilda and her dad hang around for a bit. Although, to be honest with you, I'm still pretty skeptical as to if Hilda really got her adventuring skills from this guy. And there are definitely some pretty funny moments in this too.
To be honest, I sort of figured he died when she was a baby.
So did I.
Some good stuff that was put in here, but everything else including the treasure subplot is just pretty underwhelming. 6 out of 10. Number 6. The Train to Tophatin. Coming back to this, I'd say this ended up being a pretty solid and cool start to a season like this. I think the reason as to why I wasn't super impressed with this initially when I started watching season 3 is because for the first half, nothing ended up happening, and yeah, I have to say, watching it now, I still think that this whole first part still heavily bogs down the rest of this otherwise great episode. Don't get me wrong, it is very nice to see everyone all together again, all grown up, and even meet some new people along the way too. But an episode that's about relaxing gets kinda super boring for everyone trying to watch this thing. It might be great to watch at first because there's this gimmick that, yeah, oh my god, it's so good to see all these people again. But then the second or more times you end up watching this, you're just asking yourself at that point, something please happen already. I understand that this is what the trio was struggling with too, but it did not need to take 12 whole minutes of this episode just to figure something out. Admittedly though, it was very nice to see everyone come together and just hang out and even adventure for some time. And there were definitely some great looking scenes in this, from the train, the cave, and outside of the cave and the sky. In general, outside of this being taking place somewhere besides Trollberg, this is just essentially your average adventuring episode with some cool new characters to see. I've mostly warmed up to the Puka at this point, but it still kind of rubs me off the wrong way because it looks like a friggin' minion. What else is there to say about this? That grass with legs thingy looks pretty cool. I'm not sure if that's the same one from the Troll Circle episode. Genuinely, how do these things even become alive? What happens if one accidentally walks on it while they're trying to lay down on the grass and they're just like, what have you done to me? I'm in so much pain. This episode also starts hinting at the possibility of fairies being a key point to the season, which doesn't get explained thoroughly up until the episode right after this one. Joanna and Tantu being the ones to finally join on an adventure with these three is definitely a nice change of pace and diversity to have. Look, I feel like I'm just grasping at straws at this point because based on this one episode, there isn't really much to talk about here. Half of it is everyone doing some shenanigans to pass the time, the fairies barely get a mention in this, and the rest of it is pretty much dedicated to returning a wolf egg, and there's this cool sequence where they are up in the sky and all that stuff. It's a pretty uneventful episode all around, but it carries itself by having these wholesome and fun moments sprinkled in there. And if that's all you're looking for, then you're probably gonna have no issues watching this. 6.5 out of 10. Number 5. The Laughing Merman. Oh boy. So it's come to this moment, huh? I just know a certain someone out there has waited long enough for me to talk about this episode now. Before I mention literally anything else, let's talk about this episode in general because on its own, it's still a pretty great watch, all things considered. Louise feels like a great and natural extension of these friends we've already known for a while now, but since this is season 3 we're talking about here, unfortunately this would also end up being the final time we get to see her play a major role in these episodes, which is definitely a shame because based on her personality as being the quieter and more considerate one out of the 4, she definitely would have fit in really nicely with the Freaky Friends. Man, I do not like that nickname at all. Out of all the nicknames they could have possibly came up with, their best one was calling them freaky? Especially nowadays where a term like that is usually associated with a certain person who has first name Puff and last name Daddy. And also freaky just being widely used now as a term for those activities? It certainly has not aged well at all. While this is the first and last time that Louise would play a meaningful role in this season, in the book adaptation of this episode, she does actually make an appearance in the scene that originated from the Strange Frequencies episode, and we do get a little Spotted and You'll Miss It cameo in the Forgotten Lake and Fairy Isle episodes too. And I'm sure a lot of people can get behind the idea of wanting Louise to appear in more episodes with the trio, but considering the circumstances the showrunners had to deal with Netflix, I don't exactly blame them for taking this direction. Now we can finally address the elephant in the room. Eugene. In all seriousness, I do actually really like Eugene as a character just because of how different and unusual of a character he is. A fish person that laughs like he's Joaquin Phoenix in The Joker and really loves musical theater as a passion while simultaneously carrying the ability to turn people into literal asses through his magic. Like, what in the hell were these writers smoking that day? Cause it sure as hell wasn't any old marijuana, that's for damn sure. Seriously, I am pretty sure that the illusion aspect of this episode is more of a metaphor for the fact that these four somehow all tripped on acid one day and started seeing some crazy shit. You cannot convince me with these visuals that this is exactly what a sober person would be seeing. I'm not buying it. It's a very fun change of pace from the usual serious and laid back style this show offers, because you just don't get a character like Eugene in this show at all. And for that reason alone, I can definitely see why there's two different groups of people that absolutely love him to death and people who absolutely want to see him on his deathbed. He's definitely quite the controversial character, but for me personally, I'm in one of those people somewhere in the middle where I like him, but not so much to the point where I consider him to be one of my favorites of all time. Though he does make for quite a good villain type in this too, by essentially threatening to trap these kids forever and forcing them to watch his performance for all of eternity. And what nearly caused their demise was a friggin' fart joke out of all things. Come on guys, y'all are like 13 now and you're risking your freedom for a freaking butt joke. Be so for real right now. Yeah, ironically, one of my least favorite things about this episode more so had to do with the trio just doing whatever while Louise and Eugene carried this episode on their backs. The one thing I'm still a little confused about is how Eugene does his illusions thing. What if there were only certain moments where he was actually in the moment, or if he just never existed to begin with? I guess a magician never reveals his secrets. Or yeah, they could just be high as hell. A very, very fun episode with honestly not that bad of a song from Eugene. But the visuals that came with it definitely carried that whole sequence too. While I wouldn't say that this on its own felt like the most experimental out of the season, it is definitely a lot to the point where some find it jarring enough to dislike it, and for others it's different enough to the point where they really enjoy it. I'm personally more in the favor of the latter group, which is why I'm rating this episode an 8 out of 10. Number 4. The Giant Slayer. Oh, the Giant Slayer. Yeah, I still think this is a banger episode because it's literally Hilda and Woodman going back in time into an alternate universe where they tried to convince the Giants to stay on Earth by fighting with swords and shit. Like, come on, that's so freaking cool. How can you not like an episode like this? It's like they looked at the 50-Year Night and the Eternal Warriors and decided to combine the two just for the fun of it. In hindsight though, it definitely has its fair share of problems and it's not quite the masterpiece that I thought it was. I guess my biggest issue with this episode is mainly that it can feel a little more drawn out than necessary. And that's because unlike most episodes in this where it's usually just 24 minutes long, this one was an extra 6 minutes. I'm guessing to get us more used to this world and make sure that the stakes are indeed involved. But the thing is too is that in terms of lore, unfortunately, the Giant Slayer tells us stuff that we've already known. That the humans drove the giants away and that they flew up way high in the sky, never to be seen on Earth again. So rather than trying to give us some more lore on the giants, the episode instead mostly focuses on the Giant Slayer himself, real name Halvor, which I guess is kind of fair considering this episode's name. But I really wish this wasn't just a glorified 4D retelling experience that feels like if I were to travel back in time on November 22nd, 1963, and instead of stopping Lee Harvey Oswald from shooting John F. Kennedy, I just grabbed a chair and watched everything unfold in real time. Okay, in fairness though, Hilda really did try her best to convince these giants to not go anywhere, and while the consequences of that weren't immediately apparent, as Woodman says, change takes time. Speaking of Woodman, I always love whenever he has a big part in these episodes, and the Giant Slayer is definitely no exception. I know Woodman secretly cares a lot about Hilda, even if he doesn't show it or tries to pretend that he cares more about a hammer more than anything. He's so honest yet simultaneously so bad at hiding stuff too, including himself. Like, oh my god, I just could not stop laughing when they were practically calling this dude made out of wood the devil, like he's gonna freaking suck you in or something. Wait, that doesn't sound right. Even though nothing ultimately changes by the end, getting to see all these events unfold for ourselves was still very cool to watch, and some of these scenes just look absolutely gorgeous. The art department really outdid themselves by giving us some of the sickest shots I've seen in the show. It is also interesting that we get to hear from the people themselves in this world just how exactly they felt about these giants coming in and breaking all their stuff. Especially coming from the Giant Slayer, you understand why they're upset and why they choose to be angry about them for what they believe as an intentional attack on them, rather than accepting that it could have just been an accident. But I think it's great that Hilda was able to step in and tell them that they were going about it wrong this entire time, and they should have instead tried to understand them better. But alas, plans are plans, and it was already too late to change things from there. But at least Hilda was able to play even just a small part in making things better for everyone. I would have to say that out of all the episodes in this season, this one definitely felt like the most experimental, because you have all these themes about time travel, alternate universes, acceptance, war, giants. Basically Chris Nolan's The Odyssey if it was the coolest thing ever to exist in the history of mankind. I can see why an episode like this would put some people off, since it mostly deviates from the ongoing fairy storyline in favor of another that holds absolutely no value or stakes to the world that Hilda is already a part of, aside from the possibility of not being able to return home. But personally, I think what they had going on here was super cool to see, and I also wish that we had more of these kind of alternate universe episodes, where they just try to see what happens if X happened to Y and such. It was cool to see here, and it was especially very cool to see in the 50 Year Night episode. 8.5 out of 10. Number 3. The Fairy Mound. If episode 1 felt like an appetizer to help you prepare for the main course, this episode is the main course, because oh my god, this is so much better of an episode compared to that one. I don't know what I was thinking of trashing on this on my first watch. Okay, so I have a lot to talk about for this episode, but just to get the main plot points out of the way, this episode starts right back off from the previous one, where Hilda is all curious about fairies, except now and her friends fully dedicate themselves into learning the truth behind fairies in Toffaten. They ask a bunch of people what they thought about fairies, and while everyone seems to give an answer around here, none of their answers seem to really add up very well, so Hilda decides to go investigate some more. That's when she decides to go to this house with a bunch of horseshoes on its door, and that's when she's confronted by this old crazy man named Jonas that seems really passionate about keeping fairies out of his home. You know, I have to ask, why hasn't this guy just moved somewhere else if he's just gonna become so paranoid about fairies being around? When he's living in a town that's famous for having fairies? Doesn't add up very well. And second, why is this literally the only time we've gotten to see this dude for the rest of the season? It's possible he could have just had a heart attack and died just from the thought of some fairies being around. I don't know why, but he kind of reminds me of Alex Jones just because of how he looks like the type of dude to be a serial conspiracy theorist. Anyway, so Astrid tells Hilda that, oh, the whole fairies thing was just a myth. So Hilda decides to just accept that as it is for now, and we get this little camping scene with everyone, Hilda and her mom. I have to say, if there's one thing that season 3 did better than the first 2 seasons, is that it's definitely a lot more colorful and experimental with its color palette, instead of it just being the usual warm and cool colors that we see for the majority of the series. And scenes like this where it's just Hilda and Joanna looking around in the dark are just so beautiful to look at. Hilda still senses that something is up, so she decides to follow Astrid, and wouldn't you know it, bam! A fairy mound. There was one here the entire time. So in the day, the trio decide to go see what's up with this mound until they realize they're stuck in it, which causes Astrid and Joanna to help them escape from it and decided it was best if they cancel the trip early and leave this mess. Man, right from the very start of this episode, you just know that this isn't going to be just another cozy and wholesome adventure, but rather something deeper and darker that is yet to be explored. I consider myself to be a curious person too, so I don't exactly blame Hilda for asking so many questions about how fairies have anything to do with Toffaten and why it seems like people like Astrid refuse to say anything about them. And I think that's why I consider Astrid to be one of the most interesting characters out of this whole series, because we come to later know that she is the one who got to experience so much out of fairy country and just being around the fairies in general. So she has a lot of power that's given to her for doing good, but at the same time, her actions have resulted in doing more harm and distress rather than doing what's best for the family. And while we obviously know that she only had good intentions in doing what she did, I think the way that Joanna reacted was perfectly understandable, because she was told that stuff like this wasn't going to happen and the mounds didn't exist anymore. And Toffatin was considered to be a very safe place where even someone like Hilda couldn't be too curious about it. But it was all a lie, and good intentions or not, that can still cause stress issues to happen and even break entire families apart. This was not a good look for Astrid, and we don't really get to fully understand why she did what she did up until the final moments of this series. This was a very intense episode, not just from the creepiness of those floating mushroom guys, but also from just the tension that you feel from the drama of these two. It's moments like these that give Hilda so much realism and stakes to its world. It makes it so much different compared to your other typical adventure cartoon. And by the end of it, it just gets you wondering about so many things. Why did Astrid choose to lie about the fairies? What is fairy country, and what does this foggy looking place have to do with it? And why is Joanna just now coming back to this place if she was so afraid of it for so long? Obviously, all of those questions do get answered by the end of the series, but it's just such a fascinating and interesting episode to think about, especially if it ends up being the first time someone might watch this season. Some really great lore stuff in here, and I especially love how it now tries to go harder than ever in the horror aspects of this show. Something which ironically was something I criticized about this season initially. 9 out of 10. Number 2. The Forgotten Lake. Out of all the episodes from this season, this is definitely the one I like to revisit most often because it's so damn awesome every single time. If someone were to ask me what episode of a TV show I would like to watch in an IMAX theater, I tell them this episode 1000% because it gets so loud. And out of all the episodes in this series, this one is by far the most thrilling and intense one out of its entire catalog for all the right reasons. The only reason I'm not giving this episode a 10 right off the bat is because it does kind of start slow for a bit, but it also does that by making you anticipate some of the real stuff that's about to go down here. But even with that being said, I actually don't mind the slower pace to start off with, since we still get some pretty exciting scenes from the preparation of the camping trip to these three venturing out and exploring the wilderness. And did anyone else notice that Joanna here was doing that go animate pose for a second? Speaking of Joanna, oh my god, she might as well have stolen the entire show with this episode, because she is absolutely amazing in this, and I swear that's not me being biased. Having turned from this calm, loving mother to this absolute badass monster willing to kill just to protect her daughter is something that I never considered seeing in a Hilda episode before, but holy shit is she awesome in this. And yes, before anyone says it, I know this part is supposed to be an Aliens reference, but that still doesn't make it any less cool. That frog spider is also such an insanely cool character too. Like, out of all the quote-unquote villains in this series so far, this one to me definitely feels like the scariest and the coolest looking that we've gotten. Although admittedly, his little speech at the end where he basically goes, "Well, you guys are my friends now because I only eat fairies," was kind of corny, but I mean, I guess, bro. I'm surprised I didn't try to get Vin Diesel to voice this guy, but maybe that was out of the show's budget. Regardless, this is one of my favorite antagonists to come out of the show just because of how much of an actual threat he is. By being able to grab things and move quickly like he's one giant spider. I guess that's why they call it a frog spider or spider frog or whatever.
He prefers not to be labelled.
I would also have to say that this is the best Hilda episode in terms of sound design. I already said that this episode gets loud, but more importantly than that at least, it just feels very immersive and cinematic as an experience. If you have the privilege of watching this in a home theater like I did, then you will understand exactly what I'm talking about here. I swear, it's like Chris Nolan showed up to the mixing studio one day and decided he wanted to ghost produce this thing. Like, it's just that freaking good. And while visually speaking, it doesn't do anything too different that we've seen from the rest of the season so far, some of these shots, like when the spider picked up Hilda, or when Joanna gets a cut on her hand, or when they're about to get eaten, easily complements the intensity you feel from these situations and get you real dialed in into the action. And that done sound they add into certain moments, god, that's so flippin'. This episode is just straight up amazing from start to finish. The humor is there, some of the more relaxing bits were really great to watch, and of course that phenomenal second half where it's easily Hilda at its most exciting. This is an almost perfect episode to me, but like I said, it has a few nitpicks here that I'm not exactly thrilled about. Plus, I don't think it quite reaches the levels that the 50 Year Night and Deer Fox are, so I think I'm gonna go with a 9.5 on this one. Number 1. The Fairy Isle. Yeah, this should not come as a surprise to most people, although there is a surprising amount of people who don't really consider this to be such a great ending, and I'll get to why in just a second. Personally though, I just want to say right off the bat, what an incredible run this show has had, man. There's a reason why I still love to talk about it so much to this day, and why it has made so much of an impact on me more than any other show that I've seen. It's because there's just nothing like it. Hilda is a show that's about many things, but at its core, it's a show about acceptance and becoming an adventurer by learning to try new things, even if it makes you uncomfortable. It's not just a show about cozy and fun adventures, it's about love, family, friendship, unity, and understanding of the world around us. And all of that ends up being especially apparent with this beautiful finale. I think a lot of my feelings on this finale still hold up well today, so I'll try to make this as quick as I possibly can, but man, where do I even start with something like this? Some of the criticisms I see about characters like David sometimes are that a lot of the time he's kind of played up more so for comedy rather than seeing any kind of genuine side to him. While there is definitely some debate when it comes to that, what is not up for debate is neither David or Frida were fooling around in this episode, and nobody else in this really was either, and made for quite a nice change of pace from some of the silliness that we've been seeing from these episodes so far now. I mean, I guess it has to be serious in some way considering what is talked about in this episode. Speaking of which, man, there are just so many of these moments that just made me want to burst out in tears. Like one as an example is Twig howling his heart out sad and just wanting Hilda to come back. The poor guy, man. It was already sad seeing him go in the Deer Fox episode, but seeing Twig be the sad one is just... it rips my heart out, man. And another one being that not only were Joanna's parents forced to stay in fairy country forever because they couldn't be willing to give up their daughter, and said daughter having all of their memories taken away, including this one for years up until this very moment. I'm sure it was a lot for Joanna and pretty much everyone else to take in, but for Joanna especially, seeing her this vulnerable about the fact that she's just now relearning the 10 years worth of memories she had was just so sad to see. And the cherry on top was when she turned back into a kid again and just started sobbing to her parents about just wanting to stay with them. Like, man, oh man. You know, I've thought a lot about the part when Astrid responded to a question about Joanna's parents not looking like they've aged a day, and the response being that this is just what the island thinks we might want to see. It's got me wondering on how real exactly are Joanna's parents in this. Why are their shadows just now beginning to appear? Why haven't they aged a day since the moment they left Earth? And if Joanna can change appearances and personalities on the fly, how real does that make for everyone else inside of fairy country? Well, I myself have kind of a dark theory that these were not Joanna's parents and were in fact illusions of them created by the fairy entity as a way to lure her and Hilda into fairy country, and her real parents have actually been dead for a long time now. Really think about it for a second. These shadow people only started appearing after Hilda entered the fairy mound, and that's also from where all of these dreams started to come up from too. Like Astrid said, the island chooses for those who live in it what it thinks they want to see most. And I think deep down throughout this entire season, there was only one thing that Joanna really wanted to see the most, the moment she stepped into Top 10, even if she didn't realize it at the time. Her parents. She probably knew somewhere inside of her that the memory she thought of to be real actually turned out to be lies created by Astrid because she feared about Joanna being forced to carry the pain of her parents dying. If any of that ends up being true, then that just makes the events that went on throughout this episode that much more depressing and sad to watch. Because I feel like at that point it would be less of a reunion and more of a showcase of just how lonely Joanna felt not being able to see her parents for so many years. The only thing that contradicts this theory is that her parents don't immediately go away after leaving fairy country, but an excuse to that could be, well, technically the fairy entity didn't actually die and just switched bodies, so therefore it still has control over what it does. While we're on the topic of theories, a lot of the criticism I see about this episode is that for a finale, it doesn't really try to tie up any loose ends or answer a lot of questions fans may have had about certain episodes or characters aside from addressing the topic of Hilda's family, and even that wasn't exactly done to its absolute best. I can definitely understand why people may think this way, especially after getting to know of what could have been from this season, but realistically speaking, this is a show about one thing and one thing only. Mostly. Hilda. So it'd only be fair to dedicate an entire hour-long episode, and by an extent season, about her family, which is what I'm pretty sure most fans of the show were looking forward to anyway. And honestly, I like that they kind of kept everyone's endings open-ended, because it just makes you ask of what could happen from here. Will Hilda grow up to be an inspiring and brave explorer that she's always wanted to be, or be stuck working at a dead-end job at McDonald's? What other kinds of secrets or creatures are out there that are still left to be discovered and solved? What has been the Raven doing this entire time that he's been gone? Actually, we do kind of already know an answer to that thanks to the Goodbye Raven comic that can be found in one of the compilation books. And to put it short, he's committed to trying to explore as much of the world as possible, but he definitely still thinks about Hilda even if he doesn't admit to it. This episode just makes me really sad, not just because of the actual events that happened in it, but rather the fact that this really is the last time we'll get to see any of these guys again. And for what it's worth, I think this was absolutely the best way they could have concluded this incredible and magical series. 10 out of 10. Oh man, so it's really the end of this video now, huh? So to wrap my thoughts about season 3 as a whole, there were definitely a lot of surprises I had when watching this whole thing now for the second time, compared to when I first watched it back in 2023. First off, I don't know what the hell I was thinking rating the Fairy Mound and the Forgotten Lake episodes so low on my list initially. I guess back then I wasn't really enthusiastic about the idea that the show would go a bit harder in on the horror aspect of this show, since normally it's this type of calmer and playful type of vibe, but I really like what they did in terms of horror in this. I think it made for quite some thrilling and awesome moments, and it made me wish that the show went in more with that. However, when it comes to the season as a whole, unfortunately, I still think this is pretty much the weakest out of this whole series. Not only did the amount of episodes pretty much get split into half of the episodes I got felt like, for the most part, were perfectly acceptable, but they didn't elevate the season to what it could have been. And like I said many times now, I don't exactly blame the showrunners themselves necessarily for the limitations they had. I just think, in my personal opinion, there could have been better ways in doing certain plots. But on the flip side, some of the highs that season 3 had ended up being some of the highest highs this show has ever had. And even if that doesn't necessarily turn out to be the case, it still has a lot of great stuff to offer that makes this season pretty worth it to watch by the end. The biggest thing I have with this season is just asking of what it could have been. What could we have gotten if we had the full 13 or 14 episodes instead of 8? Could we have been able to get a whole episode dedicated to Louise? What if Strange Frequencies was actually a good episode? Okay, but talking seriously for a moment here, it just makes me really sad that this is the way the series had to end. Because while season 3 is definitely not as bad as I remembered watching it now, it was inevitably going to be held back in terms of what it could do thanks to Netflix forcing the showrunners to split the whole season in half. In terms of rating, I'm currently feeling like a 7.5 out of 10, maybe leaning a bit towards a 7 for this whole series. So now that puts us to the end of this list. I'm going to do something similar that Nathaniel Bandy did, where I'll just quickly rank which were the best seasons overall and also the episodes. Seasons wise, that's pretty easy since there's only like 3 in a movie. Last place goes to season 3, third place is the movie, second place is season 1, and first place is season 2. Now let's go over what I think are the 10 best Hilda episodes overall. Number 10 is the Fairy Mound, number 9 is the Storm, number 8 is the Midnight Giant, 7 is the Witch, number 6 is the Forgotten Lake, number 5 is the House in the Woods, number 4 is the Fairy Isle, number 3 is the Bird Parade, number 2 is the 50-Year Night, and first place is the Deer Fox. Now, in terms of what I would consider to be the worst Hilda episodes, this is pretty tricky because a lot of them are not exactly bad per se, except for like maybe the bottom 2, but they're more like weak links in this otherwise amazing series. So I think for that reason, I'm only going to do like 5 instead of 10 like I did for the best episodes. Number 5 is The Job, number 4 is The Sparrow Scouts, number 3 is The Jorts Incident, number 2 is Strange Frequencies, and of course at dead last, number 1 is The Ghost. The fact that The Ghost is really the only episode I would consider to be outright bad out of this whole season just goes to show how much the people making Hilda really cared about doing this show right, and how they're willing to take risks for it to stand out as one of animated television's best work of all time. Especially now after being able to talk with some of the people making the show for the finale of the Iceberg series. Subscribe so you don't miss that one, by the way. I know a lot more now than I did about just how difficult, time-consuming, and exhausting it can be to make something truly remarkable. And that's why I think, for me at least, shows like this need to be preserved and remembered so that future generations of talent can be inspired by just how groundbreaking animation storytelling can really be and make something even more revolutionary for many more people to remember. And quite frankly, that's me. I'm inspired by this show to do a whole load of things. And not just me, but potentially thousands to millions and millions of people who had the opportunity to watch some of television's best. So that hopefully someday, people like me can have the opportunity to make a Deer Fox type of masterpiece, but in our own very special way. Thank you so much for joining me all the way to the end of this insanely long video. This project took by far the longest to make out of anything I've ever done so far. I actually had the idea for a video like this for, honestly, almost about as long as I've been in the Hilda fandom. So about like late 2018 to early 2019. Tried doing some version of a video like this in 2023 to early 2024 before scrapping that entirely. Then finally, the video you're watching right now started progress in late 2024. Recording and editing started in early 2025 before being halted, before finally putting this all together in the big June of 2026. The reason for this taking so long to make is primarily because of the Iceberg series that I've been so caught up on making, as well as generally speaking, college taking up a lot of my time and focusing as well. But I'm so glad to be able to finish it with you all today and share it with the world. Shout out, of course, to Nathaniel Bandy and Heath for giving me a reason to finish this up again. And yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning into this, and peace out.